What time of year is it when birds start flying south for the winter? What do we got, about 2 months left before they start picking up the Atlas? Is that right?
Probably.
Somewhere around there, I'm guessing. Maybe mid-October?
They probably just use GPS at this stage, right? Probably not an actual paper
Waze.
atlas. Yeah.
Unless you're a Cardinal, at which point you are not flying south for the winter or for right now, but you are flying east because the Arizona Cardinals are arriving in Westfield, right?
It might be because of the great weather, Jake, honestly.
You're not kidding.
They're coming at the right time.
They're used to the non-humid air. But Cardinals are here. That means, of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. among them as they practice with the Colts. That will be later today. J&B will be live at Grand Park in Westfield as those two begin a two-step of evening practices before the preseason comes to an end in terms of the home schedule for the Colts on Saturday against the Arizona Cardinals. And a lot to talk about with that and with the Colts. We got a big show lined up for you today on this Hump Day Wednesday. How are you? My name is Jake Query. You just heard the voice of Jimmy Cook. Eddie Garrison is here as well. We call the show Query and Company on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. And each of you ran into several of you, members of the company last night, went out and about, and always a pleasure to do so. One thing we know about the Colts is as they go out and they get set for this two-step practice, they have a new member of the company for the Colts, as a matter of fact. Wide receiver Greg Ward, who comes from the Philadelphia Eagles most recently and was signed on. Jimmy, any surprise to you that look, this is what's going to happen now, though, between now and the 27th, is as teams make other moves and guys become available, you're always looking to upgrade at positions or add depth or whatever it might be, maybe even push somebody on your own roster, and we're going to see little bit moves like this happening in terms of between now and when the roster is finalized. But any surprise at all that a receiver is the position with which they go out and make a move?
I mean, not really. When you look at where he would be slotted in at the depth chart at this stage, he would be, I guess, another body to be thrown in from a competition standpoint, but Greg Ward is not going to be a name that I'm throwing in there anyway to be like a heavy snap count guy. I mean, he was largely a depth piece for his last year in Philadelphia. I mean, he has some interesting numbers to his resume, but he's never been a guy, so to speak. Jake, I would put him closer, and I'm sorry to disrespect your one true love on the Colts depth chart, but I'd probably put him closer to, Eddie, correct me on the pronunciation we learned yesterday, but it is Derek Slukwa. I would put him more on the Derek Slukwa side of the board than I would the Ashton Dulin side. I would view it as just another workout body depth piece.
It's an insurance policy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about a guy that was on the practice squad most recently for Philadelphia, although he's had moments where he's played well for the Eagles.
He would be defined, Jake, and you mentioned this yesterday, categorizing him as a player at this stage in his NFL career as, 29 years old. You know what he is. This is not a guy that you're like, oh, maybe there's an he has a body of work where you know what this receiver is.
I'll go back to the analogy I gave yesterday, which is fantasy football is, what would you say were the peak years of fantasy football?
Jake, it's hard to say. I would argue we're still in it. I still play. Leagues are still setting records. ESPN still has that marathon. I would argue we're still at the...
It grows every year.
I would argue it is still a behemoth, especially with daily fantasy. I don't do that, but a lot of people play like the daily fantasy leagues. I'm going
to disagree and say this is an age thing, probably, right? Because I think it's more so. I think for me, in my mind, I think to myself the peak fantasy football era was 15 years ago. And then I remind myself that 15 years ago, I was more at the peak demographic age.
I would. Good.
But do either of your significant others play fantasy football?
Yes.
Haley's in a work league, yeah.
Because that to me, 10 or 15 years ago, when women got involved in it, was when it really hit its stride. And
you're probably right, it's a demographic thing, but in terms of the way it's marketed and the different fantasy football newsletters or fantasy football angles or hey, let's all do a draft league, I would argue if I was going to bend a knee on this, Jake, and tell you maybe it dipped somewhere, I would say 5 years ago when sports betting became more mainstream across the states.
That's fair.
But I would still side with Eddie that I think it's an ever-growing element of why people love Red Zone is because of two things. It's sports betting aspects, three things. Sports betting aspects, fantasy football aspects and you love whip around coverage of the National Football League.
And the short attention spans, right?
Yeah, exactly.
boom, boom, boom,
Yeah.
boom.
Should we create a fantasy football league for the company?
People would probably. Here's the thing: do we have a prize for this? I'm for it, but do we have a prize for it?
That's a good question.
Can we call it the wildly popular and shockingly unsponsored Aquarian Company Fantasy Football League? But we can't really get on anybody about the fact that it's unsponsored if we're just now coming up with it.
Right.
Well, I mean, worst case, what we could do, Jake, if we all pooled $10, we could do your route of random lids hat that you want for the winner.
Okay, that's not bad. That's not bad.
And by we all, I mean the three of us. I don't mean make the listeners pay. I was talking about like if we wanted to go in and hey, here's $10 in the pot, and the winner gets a hat.
Okay,
of their choosing.
here's what we do. We do it. We do a fantasy football league. If you win the fantasy league, then you get a hat and T-shirt representing the franchise and the college of the player who accumulated you the most points over the course of the season.
Okay, I like that. I like that twist.
Yeah.
So it comes a little bit into
if Jamar
play,
Chase is your best player, you get an
you're getting
LSU
an
T-shirt
LSU
and a Bengals hat.
Correct.
That's cool. That's cool.
And if you're not a fan of either, you're like, well, that kind of stuff. Well, then you know what? Maybe
Facebook
you're better
Marketplace,
off,
my friend.
maybe you're better off taking CeeDee Lamb because you like the Cowboys in Oklahoma, whatever it might be, right?
Yeah. No, I like that wrinkle.
So there we go. So we will do a fantasy league, and do you see the way this brain works?
Yeah.
We do a fantasy league, and the prize is this: if you win our fantasy football challenge, then you get a hat and T-shirt representing the professional franchise and college of the player that accumulated you the most points and lifting you towards victory. The reason I brought up fantasy football, the signing for the Colts that we're looking at here,
the depth
as we talk about with Greg Ward. When you're doing a fantasy football draft and you know that you're in a league that has a quarterback, two running backs, and two receivers and a flex player, let's say, right? And you're in like round 11 of your draft, and now you're drafting guys that are getting 6 snaps a game. But you're like, I just need to start loading up on receivers on my roster because between bye weeks and injuries and whatever else, I've got to have some guy that I've got to just plug in one time over the course of the season. And I've got this room at the bottom of my roster. I might as well get a receiver, a slot guy, or some sort of a versatile running back to put there and just stash for the one time that I need him. And that's kind of, I hate to belittle Greg Ward or his talent, but that's kind of what this is, right?
Yeah. I mean, it is again, it's a depth piece. It's an audition piece. It gives Greg Ward an opportunity to, I guess, in theory, contend for everybody's going to fight, right? I hate doing this. I don't want to belittle a player that is trying to fight for an NFL roster spot. Greg Ward's going to come in here. He's going to work. He's going to try his best to attempt and make this roster with one preseason game already behind us. But in all likelihood, this is probably a player that's just there for depth, for competition's sake. And he's either going to be on the practice squad and maybe there's a call-up scenario there, or he goes somewhere else. But no, this isn't a move of this isn't like the Simmons move that we thought was going to happen, right? Where you're looking at bringing in a clear starting position of need in the safety room for the Indianapolis Colts. This is strictly, once again, another solid analogy of the fantasy element of adding depth, of adding competition in camp. That's why it's not like a knee-jerk of, oh, man, Greg Ward's in town. Like, happy for him. Happy he's fighting for a spot. Jake, this is the larger conversation that we had with Shane Steichen last week of what the preseason and aspects of camp are now are less about your starters and more about guys trying to win in the margins and fight for your position on a team. I commend Greg Ward for getting this opportunity, but I largely don't anticipate there being a massive shakeup because he's in the building.
We got a lot to talk about today, including the Indiana Fever getting set to return back to action after the layoff, kind of like IndyCar is doing this weekend in Gateway. Same for the WNBA after the Olympics. Christie Sides, their head coach, will join us 20 minutes from right now. Interesting article I saw, and I want to know if the headline of the article about Christie Sides and the Indiana Fever and Caitlin Clark, and the headline jumped out at me, and I looked at it and said, whoa. And I can't wait to ask her if the headline was a misinterpretation or an actual valid thought regarding Christie Sides. That in 20 minutes. Nate Atkins going to join us. Indy start 2 o'clock. We will talk about the Arizona Cardinals and what the Colts are going to be seeing and kind of get an idea from that with Darren Urban, who covers the Cardinals. That is at 1 o'clock today. Eddie, I do have somebody here that said, what about if the loser of your fantasy league has to wash Eddie's hair on his massive head?
Oh, my
That
goodness.
task would be Herculean.
If you go to your Twitter, @JakeQuery, you can see my head is not that large, okay?
You were very I did not realize that you made it into my photo last night,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
I took a photo last night promoting the fact that at 4 o'clock today, and this is very important to me, if you are in the vicinity of the Indiana State Fair today, I would love for you to come by at 4 o'clock. I will be at the Dairy Bar, myself and Derek Schultz, serving milkshakes and everything else for the American Dairy Association of Indiana, the Dairy Bar where Jimmy and I were broadcasted last week.
Love the Dairy Bar.
It's great. And we will be at a window where, little hint here, the food is complimentary during the time that we are serving it at our window.
Ooh.
However, we collect donations for the Great American Milk Drive, which allows for milk for, underprivileged, underserved families and children. And so we collect that money. Now, when Jimmy, when you and I were out there, I happened to see some of our friends from one of the local TV stations turning in the donations they had brought in. And so I am hell-bent on making sure that we top that.
Sure.
I want to make sure that we are last year we were the top grosser in terms of donations. So I am begging of people to make a donation so that we can say, here's what we got, and then we look like big stars. That's very important to me. But last night, in promotion of that, I was at the fair. Now, let me go back to saying this. I love the Indianapolis 500. I love it. It's my favorite day of the year. I love sports in Indianapolis. I love the Colts. I love driving down Capitol and seeing all of the Bob Sanders jerseys walking into the Colts game. I love going down to Pacer games when it's dark outside at 5:30 and you're driving down Alabama and things back up because you're trying to get into the parking garage by tip and listening to the pregame. I love going to Pacer games and the crowd and the buzz and the energy. I love on Friday nights, the one thing I missed the most about doing local television was when we would do the Friday night high school football games and go to 2 games in one night. And the few times that I got to go in the helicopter, it was particularly awesome to land in over the lights and see the crowd and the buzz and the kids and the school buses. And I love it. I love everything about high school football and in Indiana. But the Indy 500 is my favorite day of the year. And what happens when the Indy 500 is done, but then there's this disappointment, this longing, this depression that goes into waiting and waiting and waiting for another year of the Indianapolis 500. Until last night. And I got a taste of it. I got the feeling again. I got the urge, the all of those things I just talked about of the sports feel in Central Indiana. I got it last night because one of my favorite things to do, and this is my one little bit of advice for people. Each month of the year, have a tradition. Each month, do something each month that is a tradition for you and for your family, your wife, your girlfriend, your husband, boyfriend, whatever it might be. But each month have at least one tradition so that you are constantly giving yourself short-term goals to make life exciting. And you constantly have something on the calendar to move towards, to keep things moving and to keep things fresh and to keep things fun and to keep things exciting. And I've always tried to do that. And one of them for us, for Shannon and myself, in the month of August is the State Fair. We go every year to the State Fair, and we go to the Dairy Bar, and we get a grilled cheese, and we get a hero, and we walk around, and we get a beer and everything else. And so yesterday I said, today's the day we're going to the fair. And I pick her up, and we're driving down Fall Creek, and all of that nostalgia towards the Indy 500, boom, came to fruition because I have never in my life seen traffic for the Indiana State Fair like I saw yesterday. And I'm coming down Fall Creek, and it's gridlocked. And I was going to try to go in through 42nd Street. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to outsmart everybody here. I'm going to go around wide, and then we're going to come in from the south. And I get down to I go down and then across 34th to Central, and it's gridlocked. And I try to cross down to 32nd and then over to Washington, and it's gridlocked. And I'm going to come back up through parking lot. I've never in my life seen anything like it, ever. But we ended up just parking actually where I live and walking over. It's about a 15-minute walk. Walking over from the Meridian, easier for me to say, Meridian Kessler area to the State Fair, walk in. And the first thing we do is I'm got to get my grilled cheese. So I take a picture of the dairy bar to promote that I'm going to be there today, hoping to raise this money to beat the local TV station. And I look at the photo, and the two things that I notice the most are the very impressive roof of the dairy bar structure, which is shaped like a barn, and then underneath it, a huge head, a massive cranium, waiting in line for grilled cheese. And as I take the photo to the photo lab and develop it,
wasn't a grilled cheese that time.
I see the image come in, and I'm like, look who's waiting in line for a strawberry milkshake.
Bingo.
None other than Eddie Garrison, who I then ran into in the beer tent.
I thought it was very kind of him to not fully take over that photo. Like, he was actually subtle.
If he would have stood on his tiptoes, it would have blocked the whole thing. But the fair yesterday was awesome. But I've never seen a crowd like that. We'll see a big crowd tonight at Grand Park for the Colts night practice with J&B Broadcasting Live. There'll be a big crowd there. There hopefully will be a decent crowd at Lucas Oil Stadium this weekend. We'll see if the roof works and how the team looks. And once again, I want to thank those that contributed, that we are going to have a number of kids in central Indiana, courtesy of the United Way, in 3 different elementary schools. They're going to be able to go down and enjoy the game because of the generosity of listeners of this program that sent me their tickets, and I forwarded them to those organizations to let kids go to the game. And it is much appreciated. I also appreciate those who have reached out to ask if it's too late to donate tickets. It is, just because in order for them to get the partnership of chaperones for the kids and organize and put it all together, they needed the head count by now. So we've reached the deadline on when to accept tickets. I'll do it again next preseason. I am very grateful for those that sent it. But we will see a big crowd, hopefully, for the Colts this weekend. Might see a big crowd for the Indiana Fever as they're getting set to get their season back underway. Phoenix will be the next opponent. That game is, I believe, Friday. Correct, Eddie?
Yes, sir. Friday at 7:30.
I hope those crowds come out back in full force, because you've had a lot of distraction, purposely done, right, with the Olympic break and the All-Star break. But, like, it's been a long time since you've had an opportunity to see Caitlin Clark and see this team at full strength with Leah Boston and get everybody back. And the point that we emphasize so much about Clark, Jake, from the moment she was drafted was, man, she hasn't had an opportunity to stop and take a breath. And now she's had that opportunity. She's had the ability to focus on her, travel a little bit, enjoy the break.
Go around the city.
Correct. Be around the city, be around the country for that matter. And now it's time to see where they're able to turn a corner to continue that playoff push, because I would argue, based on just that sole premise, if she has been playing basketball from September or October of last year to that moment of the break last month, it had been nonstop for her. And now I would argue her best days as a rookie are ahead of her because of that break and because of what's on the line for the Fever, which is a push to the playoffs. And I'm really excited about it. I hope the community, which I think they will,
I think so,
continues to show out the way they did before the Olympic break.
So we hope there's a big crowd for that, right?
Yes. Yep.
Hope there's big crowds for high school football, which gets underway basically a week from this weekend, right?
Correct. There is no week 0 in high school football, so that's good for you, Jake.
Yeah, that makes 0 sense, by the way.
Forgot about that.
I'm telling you, I have never seen a crowd like I saw last night at the Indiana State Fair. Eddie, you've been to the fair how many times? How many years would you say?
Oh, I have no idea. It's probably since I was a kid. So, 15.
Am I out of bounds in what I'm saying, or was that the biggest crowd and traffic that you've ever seen?
The traffic, I got there before you did. I got there about 4:30, 5 o'clock. There was a good amount of traffic, and then when I left, it was hectic. Like, I don't know where you park, but there's a certain lot that I park in. There was a line almost to the baseball diamond.
When we were leaving, and we were there till probably 9 or so, there were still people coming in. Now, one of the things that I thought about yesterday was and I didn't think about it truthfully until like after the fact. But when we got there, and I love everything about the fair. We got the grilled cheese. We went over, we got a pachanga. Shannon got a hero, and then we just do a lap. We go through the midway. We watch. We don't ride the rides, but we watch them. We go through and see some of the animals. I always look for a state highway map for my glove compartment because I'm like 65 years old.
Were you successful?
Well, the NDOT tent has them, but unfortunately, I did not see I couldn't find where the NDOT tent was, unfortunately. But again, I'm going to be there today, so I will look again a second time. Then so we walked around there, went to the Pioneer Village. There's just a ton of cool stuff and fun stuff to see. The tram was not going because of the fact the crowd was so big. That shows you how big it was, right?
It ends on Tuesdays at 5:00.
Well, no, they had a sign out that said the tram will not be running today because of the condensed nature of the crowd. So
I thought half the fun was trying to dodge the John Deere.
That's right.
They didn't want to still play that game with
that's right.
the amount of persons per square foot.
But while I was walking around, we were leaving, and at one point Shannon said, "Well, what time is it?" And I looked at my watch and said, "It's 10 till 9." I didn't think anything of it at the time. And then I got home and got to thinking about it. I looked at the date, and I'm like, wait a minute. And I realized that it was at 8:46 p.m. on the date yesterday of, I believe, was it 2011? And the State Fair collapse. The bridge that collapsed, or the stage that collapsed at the Indiana State Fair. And, obviously a terrible, terribly tragic situation. But Tammy Van Dam, Glenn Goodrich, Alina Big Johnny, Christina Santiago, Nathan Bird, Jennifer Haskell, and Megan Tutman were those who were fatally injured when the stage collapse happened in 2011. And I mention that not in a somber situation, but simply because I did not know those folks. I know people who knew a few of them, but they were still friends of, family of, acquaintances of, coworkers of those of us in Indiana. And while last night I was walking around enjoying the state fair and enjoying everything that comes with it, I just think it's important for those people that I just mentioned in terms of connected to them that this city still remembers that tragedy and it is not lost, the loss of those folks whose memories remain for those that knew them well. And I thought about that yesterday as I walked around, but it was a great night to be at the fair. No question about it. It was fun to walk around, and I got an ear of corn, which here's a pro tip. When you walk all the way around, on the back part of the fair, the line for the corn was like 2.5 miles long. But if you go all the way around on what would be essentially the southeast corner of the fairground area, kind of if you were coming in off of Fall Creek, that little stretch there, there's one little tent kind of tucked back by the Coliseum, and the line was not long.
I wish they had a map for the food because they have the map where everything's at.
They do.
But there is something that Olivia and I were looking for, but we could not find it.
What was it?
It was it was one of those rolls that had like the spaghetti in it. I forget what the name of it was, but that's what she was looking for. And it was a certain food truck we had to find it. We couldn't find it.
Now, I noticed that there was a vegan food truck, which
there was a Jamaican one as well.
I mean, that's all cool, but the Indiana State Fair is all about like the, poultry and
sure.
Vegan seems to be, it was like, oh, okay. You said there was a what there? A Jamaican? That I did see the Jamaican one in the back.
Yeah.
And if it is near as good as the Patties of Jamaica at 52nd and Allisonville, sign me up, because Patties of Jamaica at 52nd and Allisonville is probably the greatest restaurant in Indianapolis. Christie Sides is back. I saw a headline. I want to ask her about it. Head coach of the Fever joins us next. The WNBA is back after the Olympic break. Going to be interesting to see what that means for the Indiana Fever, because June was really seemingly when they started to hit their stride. Their head coach, Christie joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. They will be in action on Friday, taking on Phoenix to resume the WNBA schedule, currently sitting at 7th in the WNBA. Coach, first question would be, in your mind, did that break come at the perfect time, or would you kind of like to have kept things going?
Hey, man, good to talk to you. Yeah, I think for our players and the experience that we had those first couple months, I think, the break was right on time. But again, we were, we have this young team that just keeps getting better with the more time we go with this thing. So, yeah, I mean, they needed a break. Caitlin hadn't stopped playing since she started her season, her college season, the last year and her senior year. So just her to have some time to kind of not just physically but mentally just decompress a little bit. I think that goes across the board for all of our players. It just really helped us going into this break.
I was happy for you and for the Fever as well, and we've talked about it because obviously there was an acclimation period at the beginning of the season. You could see where things came together, but I wanted to ask you about this. I get in today, I log into my computer, and it has all kinds of like little headlines that pop up that are of local interest, and this headline jumped out at me. Now, granted, it was part of an interview that you had done, so, the interview is embedded in it, but I wanted you to react to this headline that jumped out. Coaching Caitlin Clark and company takes a toll on Christie sides as Fever coach breaks silence on the intense pressure, with pressure in quotation marks. And I understand that you explained a lot of that in the interview itself. Is that a clickbait headline, or is there accuracy to it?
Yeah, I think the pressure that I was more talking about was just the external expectations is more what I was like, the expectation of the outside of where the Indiana Fever should be, from where we really are and the process that we're in. I mean, 2 years ago before I was here, they'd won 5 games, lost last in most categories on both sides of the ball. Last year, take this job and built a great foundation with a great young group, and just kind of we keep moving in the direction that as a rebuild, you can't get ahead of yourself. If you get ahead of yourself, then it's not going to be sustainable. So, breaking my silence on the pressure. I mean, I'm a coach and I want to win every game, so I put a lot of pressure on myself to do what I can to put my players in position to win games. But I know exactly who my team is. I know exactly where we should be. Opposed to what, some people might think. Like, we're right in right where we're supposed to be. When we started the season, I sat down with our GM and staff, and we kind of said, 11, right at 11, 12 wins was kind of before the break is kind of where we saw ourselves sitting, and we're right there. So, yeah, I do put pressure on myself because I want to win. I'm a competitor. But I understand the process of building this thing back to getting back to winning championships, and we're moving in that direction.
When you're building a team, Coach, like you guys are doing, and a franchise, a program, realistically, Christie Sides, the head coach of the Fever, our guest. For people that are listening, whether it be in business, anything that you're going about doing, which is the bigger challenge in leadership? Getting the people that you're leading to understand the process, or getting them to understand that following that process means not buying into the external narrative about it?
Jake, listen, the external, what you're just saying, that was day one of what we tried to make sure that we talked about from the beginning. The keeping things, it's going to be really hard to turn off the outside noise, but that is going to be huge. And that's been very difficult for our players and, where we are. And it's a great place to be. We're playing in front of sold out arenas, and, we're it's just an amazing time in women's basketball. We just happen to be under the microscope of it all. And which is, as long as we can keep doing what we're doing, staying resilient, which our players did, they had that hard month of May, and we learned from that month, and we just keep getting better, and we just keep preaching habits, making good championship habits, and keeping the process, building on where we are, game in, not looking ahead, and not getting too low either. That was huge for us with those losses. With a young group, they got really down. We had to make sure, if they stay knew exactly where we were, what we were trying to do, and that was to just keep getting better.
Coach, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but since the All-Star break and the Olympic break, how much have you seen of Caitlin Clark?
Well, I didn't want to see her for a week and a half, so she went and did her thing, which she needed to do. We gave them off. I think it was like 10 or 11 days, just straight, just to get out of town, get away, go vacation, do whatever it is you do. And then we had a good plan when we got back. This young team, we worked on a lot of team building things. That's so important for sustainable success. I know, people want to just look at the nuts and bolts of it and the practice, but it is so important to build a team that at the end of the day, just if you like each other, you're going to play harder for each other. You're going to sacrifice for each other. You're going to do things, when things get hard, you're going to pull together and not separate. And so we really focused on that, along with, for the first time, we've had time to practice. We had a good, solid, significant time to play together and work on things that we needed to get better at, and also see players that like Demiris Dantas, who didn't practice with us at all. And, Kelsey Mitchell, who's, phenomenal player, didn't play in any of our training camps. She had hurt her ankle. And so we were able to put everybody on the floor to practice together during this time.
Indiana Fever head coach Christie Sides is our guest, joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. I ask how much you've seen of Caitlin for this follow-up, which is that I think her best rookie days are ahead of her, solely on something you mentioned earlier in our conversation, which is she has been nonstop since last college basketball season. Have you seen a sense of comfortability, a sense of, relief and excitement and new energy out of her that you hoped you would get with the Olympic break?
Oh, of course. I mean, a lot of it, is just the time that she's been able to, she had off, right? I mean, she needed that break. But then they've been able to, practice and be around each other as a team. They've been able to get to know each other. There's a lot more fun banter that goes on in practice now because they just feel more comfortable with each other. It doesn't happen overnight. We analyze everything. We have a way to pull a stat from every option that you can play in this game: shooting, passing, dribbling. Caitlin's shots were short. I mean, her legs, she needed time to get her legs under, and that's what everything that we looked at. I mean, that's what it showed. And so just for her to have that time to get her legs back under, I mean, I 100% believe what you're saying. I think her best basketball, these next 14 games are, I think it's ahead of her.
Coach, are you intrigued, or I guess I should better the question by saying, how intrigued are you to see just how much your team, the gelling, quite frankly, that your team was able to do just before the break? How it's going to be now coming off of the break, and if it's not there and you got to kind of re-jumpstart that, how long do you think it will take to acclimate and get back to the rhythm that you guys had?
I think it's always hard with a young team. Like I talked about just some of our situational things where we played like New York and got a great win against New York, and then to come back and play Washington after that. Like every team in this league is good, and they can beat you any night of the week, and so you have to prepare for every game the same. And with a young team, we beat New York. That game after the game is a big one, and we didn't take care of business. Same thing. We go to Minnesota, beat Minnesota at Minnesota, and then lose to Dallas. And that's a learning curve. That's a process. You have to learn to prepare yourselves for those games after the game. Our chemistry was showing, like you said, month of June. You could see it because of the time spent. From on court as well, just the timing of passes. Learning where people were going to move in certain situations, and just like being comfortable with each other. And so now to have where we're able to do that in a setting where we're able to build that without the pressure of preparing for games, like practice what we need to practice and then work on that team chemistry, that camaraderie. These guys are ready to play a game against someone else. We have a great group of practice guys that show up every day, and they make us better. But it's just, it's time for the lights to come back on and these guys to get a game.
The lights will be on for a remaining 16 games of the regular season for the Fever, starting the second half. We'll call it that, 7th in the WNBA, tied with rival Chicago. 9 games remaining at home of the remaining 16, so plenty of opportunity to see the Fever starting this Friday at the Fieldhouse against Phoenix. Christie Sides, the head coach on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. Coach, we appreciate it. We'll let you get back to work, and best of luck. We look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you, guys. It's always a pleasure.
Christie Sides, the head basketball coach of the Indiana Fever. It is interesting, and I thought, Jimmy, one of the interesting things there is when you have a team that is picking back up like that, is it advantage young team that kind of doesn't know better, or is it advantage veteran team? I think probably advantage veteran team. I'm very curious to see how they play on Friday.
Well, and it's a unique break, right? Because you're getting the longer extension because of the Olympic aspect of it. And so you're having to press pause on everything. And one thing that we argued, Jake, was, yes, it stunk not having Caitlin Clark on that Olympic team. I understand that it was a large coronation for Diana Taurasi being, the only basketball player, I believe I have that stat right, to accomplish the feat of winning 6 gold medals. It's an incredible achievement, and you tip your cap to Team USA, but I was still steadfast, as I think you and Eddie were, that she could have gained a lot from being a part of Team USA. She wasn't. She was instead a part of the WNBA All-Star team and had this opportunity to take a much-needed break for her, and that's what you're banking on. You're banking on what Coach Sides mentioned, them getting together for a little mid-season mini camp and getting players back and being ready to make this playoff push. But so much of it goes with, and Jake, I'm glad you brought up that headline about the pressure for Coach Sides, because I feel like to some extent everybody's feeling that because of the aura of Caitlin Clark and the talent of Aaliyah Boston, of back-to-back number 1 overall picks on this roster. They want results now. I think it's equally important. Yes, winning matters at the end of the day, but that pressure cooker needs to be released to some extent, and at least from what Coach Sides said there, it sounds like that's happened. As they've gotten closer together, as more inside jokes and camaraderie is being developed on the team. Youthful ignorance, as you point out, can sometimes be a blessing and a curse. I think it can help you in a situation like this where there's so much outside pressure, but you're focused on your goal of making the playoffs.
Would you say, Eddie, this show features more inside jokes or more youthful ignorance?
Ooh, that's a good point. That's a good question right there. I want to add something here with the Fever real quick. They do face the Phoenix Mercury on Friday. Now, Phoenix had 3 players on the Olympic team: Kalia Copper, Brittany Griner, Diana Taurasi. So they didn't get that month-long break. Those are their 3 top scorers. They play Thursday night as well. So it's the second night of a back-to-back, a.k.a. a Sega Baba.
No, we're not.
For Phoenix on Friday night.
No Sega Baba. We don't use that here. That term has been banned. Do we have a sounder for officially banned terms?
No.
We need to come up with one. You guys, I will allow you guys to pick a term of mine.
Okay, I thought you're lumping
banning
me into the Sega Baba camp.
But Sega Baba is absolutely banned from the show. Nobody says that. Nobody knows what it means.
So it's a really good chance for them to start the final 16 games on the right foot. 6 of their last 7 games on the regular season schedule are at home. They have 7 games against teams under 500, and they're right there in competition with Phoenix for that 6th seed. They're 6 games behind Vegas for 5, so there is a chance for them to threaten to be in that 5-6 range potentially, depending on how the teams in front of them do.
Nobody says Sega Baba, by the way.
Is that the biggest pet peeve in terms of lingo from your alleged friend?
Is it that?
No, it's anything. That
or is it
says.
Midtown?
That's a good choice. If you could only eliminate one, Midtown or Sega Baba.
Is not a thing in Indianapolis. It's not. You live in New York City, Midtown, sure. By the way, the Fever now for the remainder of the season, and I think this is really important for especially people that want to go watch warm-ups. I know that it's really popular for people to be able to go down and watch shoot-around, especially when Caitlin Clark's shooting around. Each game now, the door will open 90 minutes prior to tip as opposed to the previous 1 hour. So an extra 30 minutes you get to watch. So if it's a 7:30 tip, for example, doors will open at 6 p.m., chance to be able to go in, watch, see what's taking place.
I'm glad that pressure element is real for Coach Sides and company, because it should be to some extent, right? We talk about it all the time, how we want winning back in Indianapolis and having established traditions once again. You have a great group of women on that roster, but you're led by 2 of the most coveted number 1 selections. Clark is in a conversation of her own, but Aaliyah Boston was highly sought out for as well 2 years prior to that. This is a team that wants to be done in the lottery. And the first step to that, everybody's chasing the aces, But the first step to that is getting back to the postseason. And they primed themselves in a perfect position with 11 wins in those first 26 games to make a strong push over these last 16 and finally get back to the postseason.
Have I mentioned to you guys like 50 times that my cousin works for the Las Vegas Aces?
Not 50.
The one thing that's cool is they gave last year when they won the WNBA, they gave all their employees the same ring that the players get.
Really?
Like, I mean, I'm sure it's maybe the diamonds are not real. I don't know, but it's the same size. The Colts, for example, when they won the Super Bowl, and don't get me wrong, I mean, this is very, very cool. When the Colts won the Super Bowl, everyone in the organization got a ring, but they were of different size variation, right? The players got a big one, and then, they got the – Eddie, we'll put this in Starbucks terms. The players got the –
My kind of language.
Is it venti?
Yes.
And then the like support staff and things like that, they got the what's the
grande?
Medium? The grande, okay. Although I believe you're supposed to say grande, right?
I don't know. I say grande.
And then the ones that look like a class ring, which are still very nice and very generous, but the smallest variation of the three are what?
The tall.
A tall?
Now wait a minute.
Or is it a short? Because I think it goes short, tall, grande, venti.
I don't think short's on that menu.
No, hold on.
I don't think short is on the Starbucks
I think
menu.
Tall, to me, tall is would be a larger cup of coffee than a grande.
There is a short, really?
Yeah, it goes demi, short, tall, grande, venti, and then Trenta.
How many ounces are in
So
demi?
what's the biggest one?
Trenta.
Okay, so the rings the players gets the Trenta then, right?
Yeah.
Now wait a minute. A tall. So if you and I walk into a Starbucks to get your chai tea,
yes,
and you order a tall and I order a grande, which of us is getting more chai tea?
You.
The grande?
Yes.
See, no, the
grande
tall
is 16 ounces, tall is 12 ounces.
Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Way to ruin it, Jimmy.
Well, I was trying to give the facts.
We were getting there. We were getting
tall,
there.
though, if you go into a bar and you order a beer,
he's getting frustrated with Starbucks labels.
The taller
ounces
the
are
glass
important.
is the typically a taller glass would feature more liquid. So the tall should be a bigger size.
Here's how you know.
Why don't they just say small, medium, and large?
Here's how you know it. Ready? Because you hear tall, you're like, oh, okay, that guy's tall, he's fit. But if you say, oh, that guy's grande, you know what I mean?
Grande to me
fella.
means a short little step. Like grande to me, a double espresso is a grande. Like it's short, stout, packs a punch, right? Tall is like that's a 22-ounce glass or a 16-ounce glass. That's a tall glass. Sure. There's a lot of liquid in there.
Sure.
Grande, short. Eddie Garrison, grande, right?
But a little
short,
bigger
stout
can
doesn't
hold
necessarily
more.
pack a punch, but compact.
How would you
right?
know?
Compact. Trust me, just a hunch. But grande, short and compact. Tall, long and lean. I'm just telling you.
I'm a catcher or a former catcher. I have to pack a punch, Jake. Come on now.
Okay, fair enough. If you're going to punch somebody out at second, I get that, right? Familiar face going to be out at the Colts complex. Not the Colts complex, excuse me. Grand Park. A familiar face is going to be there, and it's not just the one we work with. I'll let you know what I mean next. There were many of you, I'm not saying I wasn't one, that were intrigued over the possibility of the Colts, everybody knowing that they needed to get a dynamic playmaking wide receiver, moving up in the draft or doing something to try to get Marvin Harrison Jr. And, of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. ends up with the Arizona Cardinals. But they are here for the joint practice sessions and then, of course, preseason game against the Colts. It is expected that Marvin Harrison will be here. It is so interesting because when Marvin Harrison played for the Colts, three things about him that were almost a certainty in the locker room. Number one, he always had a rack of Tasty Cake snack cakes outside of his locker that I believe they stocked for him, which was amazing because the guy had like zero body fat on him, and here he was, had a sweet tooth all the time for Tasty Cakes, which are a popular East Coast, notably Philadelphia area, Little Debbie / Hostess type cake. Number two, Marvin Harrison very, very, very seldomly after games would do interviews. You'd go up, and I would always, after every game, first thing I would do was go right to Marvin Harrison's locker because you had to get him quick because he got out of there fast. And he would always turn it down. Not always, but 90% of the time. And every once in a while, he'd say, yeah, okay, I'll answer a couple questions. And I would start to do the interview, and Rich and I was usually with me. We always kind of worked close to one another. But then once a couple of microphones got in the way, then boom, he was just gone. So finally I asked him once, I just said, why, you're a pretty good interview. Why are you so elusive about it? And he said, I don't mind talking to people one-on-one or even two-on-one, but once a group gets around, I get stage fright, and I get really nervous of public speaking, and I leave. Okay. But when talking back in those days, if the Colts would win on Sunday, they got Monday and Tuesday off, and the team would have to report on Wednesday. And so Dungy, after a win, Tony Dungy would say, like, great win, da-da-da-da-da, see you guys on Wednesday. And Marvin Harrison, if you talk to other players, they will tell you, they knew, okay, well, we're going to see Marvin on Wednesday. He's not going to be at dinner with anybody tonight. He's not going to be getting together watching Monday Night Football with anybody on Monday. Nobody knew where he went. Nobody knew what was going on. And it was not until, quite frankly, later in his career when it was like, oh, well, he has a son that lives in Philly, and he goes back to Philly every weekend. I mean, he has the car wash, and there's other stuff going on there that we know about now. But it was very private even that he was a father. And an involved father. I mean, not like an absentee father. I mean, he was an involved father. He just was very, very private with his private life. That son now, obviously, one of the dynamic playmakers in the NFL. It is expected because he certainly was in college. So Marvin Harrison is expected to be at Grand Park, or at the very least at the game coming up this weekend. Now, Eddie, another teammate from that era also going to be here, correct?
That is correct. Colts Life on Twitter, at Colts Life, announcing about 45 minutes ago that Edgerrin James will be signing autographs near Field 2 at Grand Park from 5 o'clock to 5:45 tonight.
Very cool. 45 minutes he'll be signing. That's cool. And
I would also emphasize further to Colts fans, outside of the nostalgia, outside of getting the opportunity to see John, who's going to be on remote out there tonight, this is the real meat and potatoes of the offseason, are these joint practices. I'm not saying don't have a good time and have fun at preseason game number 2, and there's still stuff to learn there. It's always a great atmosphere at Lucas Oil Stadium, but we've talked about it with a number of different people, whether it's Stephen Holder, whether it's Mike Chappell, whether it's Shane Steichen last week. Coaches really enjoy and value, to some extent more so, these joint practices than they do the actual preseason games, because they can control and simulate more of specific things they want to learn about their team, specific stress tests they want to put their team through, and areas of real growth, development, and observation that just aren't allowed and aren't present to you within the context of a preseason game. So get out there, and if you can, soak it up, because these are real opportunities to get a sense of where you're. It's a much better sense in my mind, Jake, and I don't think I'm in the minority on this. It's a much better sense to get a feel for where your team's at a joint practice than it is 2 drives in a preseason game.
One of the guys or not one of the guys, someone who happens to cover the Arizona Cardinals on a very, very inside basis is going to join us next. And I have a question of something that Indianapolis may or may not see this weekend beyond just Marvin Harrison Jr. Darren Urban, covering the Cardinals, joins us next. Tonight at 6 p.m., the Colts and Cardinals will get underway. Now, I'm going to plead ignorant here. J&V, you just heard, will actually be out there. Do the Cardinals begin the practice today, or does that begin tomorrow in terms of the two-team sessions? Do we know, Eddie?
Those two-team sessions begin tonight,
okay,
6
so
o'clock.
Darren Urban is among those who will be curious as to what's taking place. He will be doing so from the Arizona side of things. You can read his work at azcardinals.com. He is the director of editorial content and senior writer covering the team. Joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest line. Darren, I appreciate the time. I will get right to the question that I always have about these things, and that is when you have two teams that do these organized practices with one another, do you think that there's any discussion between the two coaching staffs of, hey, can you guys try to present this sort of a look in a scrimmage because I want to see how our guys go against that, or we need this, and then in terms, what do you need us to do? Or is this a true competition, if you will, head-to-head without giving any sort of a tip what the other one's going to see?
I think that's a good question. I mean, Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen are obviously close, having coached together with the Eagles. I know for a fact that they've had conversations about how these practices are going to go. But in terms of, like, leaning into, like, hey, Shane Steichen says, my offense needs to see this from your defense, I don't think that would really happen. In fact, when Jonathan Gannon talks about practices like this, one of the things he likes the most is that his guys are going to see stuff they aren't expecting, which when you go through training camp against your own guys, you know kind of what's coming, especially after a couple weeks or 3 weeks in. So I don't think there's anything that specific. Obviously, they're going to line up, okay, we're going to do this in this session, this in this session in terms of 11 on 11 or goal line or whatever it might be. But in terms of looks, no, I think that it's about the competition. It's about not knowing exactly what's going to happen and seeing how your players react to that. Because I know from the Cardinals side, Jonathan Gannon sees these practices almost as important as preseason games, especially for his main players. He didn't play hardly any of his starters in the first preseason game, and I wouldn't be surprised if most of them don't see any preseason game action. So this is going to be one of the few times that he's going to see his guys against opponents that aren't from his regular roster.
Where, in terms of the rookie outlook for Marvin Harrison Jr., do you have expectations? Because for me, and I know that seems silly because he captivated, college audiences for the last 2 seasons, but I'm expecting a Justin Jefferson, a Jamar Chase level of impact out of the gate. Why or why not can that happen for Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Well, I think why could be just because of I think he's that talented of a player, and I think he's already got that kind of rapport with Kyler Murray. And they needed a number one receiver very badly. That was something that they were missing, which is a big reason why they took him with the first pick. Now, what the statistics end up looking like, I am going to be very curious to see. I think Marvin Harrison could have a huge impact on this offense and still be around 1,000 yards and maybe not Jefferson Chase type numbers because of how this offense is going to run. This is a top 5 rushing offense last year, and that's with having Kyler Murray only for half the season. I like their running back room. I think they've done well to give themselves a decent offensive line. And I think this offense, I think they like the idea of controlling some clock and grinding it out and being very physical. When you add in the fact that they've got a rising tight end star in Trey McBride, and they're hoping that Michael Wilson takes a big jump in his second year as a receiver, does Marvin Harrison get enough targets to get the giant stats? Possibly. I'm not ruling it out. But I also think he could be very important even if his stats aren't gaudy like that. So I'm curious to see how that turns out. I do think they have a chance to have a very, very good offense because of Harrison and because of these other things. And, we'll see how it goes. Harrison is definitely not the type of guy who's going to go beating on his chest saying, I'm going to get 1,400 yards. So we'll kind of see how it goes.
The who is Darren Urban that's joining us on the program. The where is azcardinals.com. That is where you can read his articles and his coverage of the Arizona Cardinals, and the what is the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line where we find him. Darren, for the Colts and this particular, taking advantage of seeing a different team through practice and setting themselves up for the regular season, Arizona specifically does what really well that is going to be the thing that most benefits Indianapolis in terms of trying to corral it and getting good practice on that?
I would say right now, the first thing that would pop into my head, and again, there's going to be a limited amount of this because you're not tackling to the ground or anything, but this is a very, very good running team. I can't tell you that I know off the top of my head how the Colts did against the run last year, but the Cardinals run the ball very well. And if you're looking for your team to be stout up front against the run, and basically everybody always says that's where your defense always needs to start is stopping the run, I think the Colts will get a good test with that right out of the box. The other thing is I think because of that, the way the Cardinals can run play action or some different tweaks in terms of freezing linebackers and or defensive backs in pass plays when it's going to be, it's not a handoff, it's Kyler Murray rolling out. I think the Cardinals have developed a very good game in that. So I think the defense can be tested. On the other side of the ball, that's a great question because I think the Cardinals have a ton of huge questions defensively. They weren't great on that side of the ball last year. They upgraded. But right now they have a lot of young guys on defense. And I don't know what this defense is going to look like. So I can't really sit there and tell you for sure what it would benefit the Colts offense most going against this defense because I think there's still so many questions about the Cardinals defense.
Darren Urban is our guest of azcardinals.com. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Darren, I still can't believe it's year 6 of the Kyler Murray era. He admittedly, myself included, has been the victim of, man, should you rush to pay a guy type of conversation in the National Football League. Is he worth high-level, high-end quarterback money? He's shown flashes. He's also struggled to stay healthy, and he's also showed levels of head-scratching plays too, and this is, as we mentioned, year 6 for him. What is the outlook for Kyler Murray? And you mentioned a dynamic running game combined with a new shiny new toy in Marvin Harrison Jr. Why is this the year that he gets back to that offensive rookie of the year we saw out of the gate?
Well, I mean, I think there's a couple reasons for that. One, I think having an entire offseason with his coaching staff, which he didn't get last year because of the ACL tear, I think will make a big difference. He's happier. He's more mature. He understands what they're trying to do offensively, and I think he loves the fact that he's got guys around him who can help him. There was definitely times in the Cliff Kingsbury era where basically the main part of the offense was go make something happen. And I think he got a little frustrated by that, and it didn't benefit them all that well. I will say, I know, again, the ACL tear was a big deal. It's not like he's been super injury prone. He's missed a few games here and there, but if you take out the wrecked knee, he has not been injured. Now, that's going to take a big chunk out of it out, but he's not been injured as much as people think he has or talk about him being. He does have to play better, but I think you started seeing some of that by the end of last season. And considering by the time he got back last year, where it was week 8, week 9, week 10, whatever it was, you're having to practice getting ready for games on a weekly basis, and you don't really have any time to prepare yourself in the offense. I think he's done a nice job. I mean, here's a guy who never worked under center, and now I think there's a chance he's going to work the majority of the time under center, and that was something he had to get used to, and I think he's done a nice job. Is it a guarantee? No, but he does have weapons around him. I do think this offense benefits him. And as far as the contract goes, it's a fair question to say that if he got paid too early, but as we've seen with the contracts, I mean, I think he's already like the 9th or 10th highest paid quarterback now, or whatever it is, because of all these other contracts. I mean, the reality is if you're going to have a guy that's not a journeyman, he's going to get paid a lot of money. And you can say he's not worth it, but, I mean, look across the league. There's lots of guys getting that kind of money, and they're all not going to win Super Bowls. So I think that's just where quarterback money is these days.
when you look at Kyler Murray, Darren Urban, our guest who covers the Arizona Cardinals, Anthony Richardson is a quarterback, Darren, that the Colts are very excited about. And I know that we saw brief glimpses of him last year, but one of the things I really like is the ability to mix his legs in with his ability to throw the football. And Kyler Murray's a similar quarterback of that. From what you've seen, and I don't even mean necessarily from an injury standpoint, but from what you've seen, is there a danger in letting a quarterback get too comfortable with designed run plays and thus deviating him away from the disciplines in the pocket?
It's funny you bring that up because, see, to me, Kyler Murray never had a ton of designed runs. A lot of what he was doing was scramble stuff, and I don't think he loves the design runs as much, and I don't know if there's going to be a ton of them for him in this offense. And part of it is you talk about the injury thing, and I know you said aside from that, but, Kyler's a guy who, when you watch him play all the time, he doesn't take a lot of hits. He's not stupid. He's going down if a guy is close to him. Now, a couple times you want to see him maybe push for that first down a little bit more, but he is safe with his body. And I think that's something to keep in mind. I think Kyler wants an offense where he's throwing the ball more often, even from the pocket. I think what's interesting with Richardson or some of these other running quarterbacks is because their frame is bigger, a lot of people see that he's ahead of the game than maybe a Kyler because he's bigger. But I actually think that makes it more dangerous because you are willing to design runs more often and you are willing to take more hits, whether you're the coaching staff or the player. And I'll be curious to see how Richardson's career kind of goes through an evolution of that because I do think you have to be cognizant of that. And I think Kyler's a guy that was cognizant from the time he walked in that he's very aware he's 5'10", 205 or whatever he is, and that if he takes too many hits, it can be a danger. And I think as you watch the Cardinals offense kind of evolve, I think there's going to be some design runs, but I think they're going to be smart about that part of it. And I'll be curious to see how the Colts deal with that with Richardson.
On the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, Darren Urban is our guest of azcardinals.com. Switching to trench warfare with Laiatu Latu, the hype has been there, and all the good praises that have been sent his way have shown in the small tape that we've seen through whether it's camp or whether it's through the one preseason game. When he's matched up with Paris Johnson Jr., what type of challenges and how will he be tested in these joint practices?
Well, I do think Paris has done a nice job. I think Paris had a solid rookie season playing on the right side. He's moved to the left side for the first time. Now, again, he didn't play in the first preseason game, but watching him in practice, I think he's gotten very comfortable on the left side. Paris is an incredibly intelligent player. He's so athletic. When you look at him, he almost looks more like a basketball player than a tackle when you see him off the field. He's not – he doesn't have a lot of extra pounds that you would say, oh, yeah, he's an offensive lineman. He's just very athletic and big. I'll be curious to see how that matchup goes because the Cardinals, quite frankly, don't have a guy like Latu right now on the roster that is testing Paris in practice. I mean, B.J. Ojulari, who is a guy who was going to be their main pass rusher, tore his ACL in practice and is already out for the season. So this will be the first time Paris is really getting tested on something like that. So I think that's going to be a really good matchup. Latu is a guy that I think if the Cardinals would have been picking 4 and in the teens, that definitely would have been somebody that they would have honed in on and potentially traded up for if they weren't picking so late in the first round with their second or first round pick. So I'm very curious on that. I think it's going to be a great matchup to watch for these 2 days.
Darren, lastly, your impressions, and I know it's going to be because your job is to cover the Arizona Cardinals. I mean, we're talking different side of the country, different conference for that matter, but it's still the NFL. Yeah. I always am curious of this answer from people that cover other franchises. Just your outside perspective or thoughts on the Indianapolis Colts. You see them as what kind of a franchise that is what level of competitive heading into the season?
I like their coaching staff. I think they're a solid team. I think because of the division they're in, there's some wide openness to it that I would think would give fans hope. I'm a big believer, and I've been covering the league for 25 years now. I don't care about the rest of the team. If your quarterback is not settled, it's tough. And I'm not saying the Colts quarterback situation isn't settled, because obviously it's Richardson, but he's so inexperienced right now, and he missed so much time last year. I would have hesitation in terms of they're definitely in a good place, because I need to see what Richardson can do. I think he's ultra talented in terms of his tools, but we all saw what he did and didn't quite accomplish at Florida. I think he still has a lot to prove, and I think the Colts go as far as Anthony Richardson goes, and that would be my outsider perspective.
Lastly, Darren, you and I are about the same age. I think you went to Arizona State. Is that right?
I did, yes.
Okay.
I did.
When I grew up in Indianapolis, and when I was in high school, I have no idea how or why this came about, but the perception was that Arizona State University was the number one school in the country because it was nothing but parties and hot chicks in our era. Is that pretty accurate?
I think Arizona State is a large enough university. I don't know. We have whatever it is, 50,000 students. I think there is definitely that part of it. I feel like I got a pretty good education. The journalism school is Walter Cronkite, and I think it's one of the best in the nation, so I will stand by that. But I certainly cannot deny that parties and hot women are part of it as well.
And Sparky is an awesome logo. They need to just go back to the gold helmets with Sparky on the side, man. Those things were awesome.
I am okay with that.
All right. Darren, I appreciate it. While you're in Indianapolis, spend a lot of your money here, leave it here, and certainly enjoy it. But we appreciate the time today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, Darren Urban, who is the director of editorial content, senior writer at ArizonaCardinals.com, azcardinals.com. Jimmy, I'm telling you, when I was in high school, everybody. So what schools do you apply? Well, I'm looking at Arizona State. Everybody wanted to go to Arizona State. And at that time, Arizona, which entering into my high school years was almost unheard of. Nobody ever mentioned them. And so much of athletics are so important towards the prestige of a university. And I know that sounds weird, and I know that people in the education circles would buck against that, and I understand it. When people say, why are they paying a football coach $10 million? Why are they paying a basketball coach? The University of Arizona is a prime example. When I was in high school, seemingly 10% of the graduating class that I went to school with in the 4 years that I was in high school applied to go to school at the University of Arizona. And so much of the University of Arizona was put on the map because of Lute Olson and Steve Kerr and Sean Elliott and that team that broke through and was number one in the country. And they had an awesome-looking floor with the cactus on it, and it was just like this, literally this oasis or this mirage of this awesome place out in the Southwest. And then Arizona State, because of just the hype of their football stadium alone, Sun Devil Stadium, when they would be on television. Athletics in the sports of a university, and yes, you have to have a good academic reputation. I'm not taking away from that at all. But in terms of the introduction, ask Butler University what happened to the number of applicants they got once they went to back-to-back Final Fours. And then that increases the academic reputation of a school because you can become more selective on the students that you're taking in. And then all of a sudden, iron sharpens iron, right?
Yeah.
So I do understand both sides of it. I mean, people that are like, why are we spending this much on, it's a university, it's a public university, why are we spending this on sports? I totally get it. But the other side of it is exactly what I just mentioned. I mean, there had to be schools when you were in school that kids were aware of because of the sports aspect, and you had no idea how good a school it was. You just knew of the school, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, a lot of them were out west, strangely enough. I mean, with being a Midwest state, you're either going east or you're going west in terms of big powerhouses. But yeah, you hear Arizona or USC or whoever, and you knew that they were top tier athletic programs. A couple kids wanted to go to Alabama. I didn't know the academic rate or prestige of Alabama, but you knew Nick Saban, powerhouse for football. I mean, sports become an arm of really all walks of life, but especially collegiately, of the impressions and the eyeballs that you're throwing at potential students. And who knows, maybe it could be as simple as a volleyball national championship that a young girl sees. That's an Arizona player right there. Oh, I want to go there. Whatever. Or it could be the game-winning touchdown for the Georgia Bulldogs in an SEC title game. Whatever it is, the imprint is lasting with athletics and potential students.
And then you get kids that you fall in love with the university based on that, and then you realize the academics of it, and you go, yeah, I got no chance.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember.
Don't fall in love with Ivy League basketball, kids. It's a dangerous game.
When I was really young, my uncle had a heart transplant. And I've told this story many times before, but in 1985, heart transplants, I don't think were certainly what they are now. And Good Morning America was doing a segment featuring the medical breakthrough of heart transplants. And my uncle was selected to be able to have his heart transplant shown on television on Good Morning America. So my mom and dad called me in late to school, and I watched the heart transplant taking place for my uncle at the Stanford University Medical Hospital in Palo Alto, California. And so my dad was out there for it, obviously, and came back and brought me a Stanford sweatshirt. And I was in 5th grade, I think. And I'm like, Stanford, I want to go to Stanford. Well, that lasted until I realized the reputation of Stanford, right? What % of applicants do you think get admitted to Stanford University?
Oh, man.
What's your guess? I'm going to go with 4%.
Yeah, I would. The high end I would have gone with is 7, and I think that's way too high.
And keep in mind, none of those applicants are anything other than, in other words, every single one of them is probably a valedictorian, right? 3.7%.
Wow.
Think about that. That's unbelievable. Will Fleming went there, and I'm like, every time I talk to him, I feel like a mental pygmy. You know what I mean? Not necessarily hard to do. What are you anticipating or looking for from the Colts over the course of this chance of being around another team for an extended period of time, other than inevitably a fight?
Well, I mentioned yesterday Anthony Richardson, but as we dive deeper at it, I'm curious to see what they do situationally with A.D. Mitchell, because we've talked about the rigors of trying to come back from a high ankle sprain, which Josh Downs was diagnosed with, and you saw in the preseason game, the majority of it anyway, when they had the starters out there, A.D. Mitchell lined up in the slot. I think that he is the most versatile wide receiver that you could change positions for of that wide receiver room. I think it's pretty clear that Alec Pierce needs to be your separator, your guy that can take the top off of the defense. I think A.D. Mitchell is in that realm as well, but I think he can do a lot of things pretty solid, pretty well to stem the tide of a Josh Downs if it ends up being a loss for a game or two. So how does he look situationally? And then the other element of it goes back to Richardson. It will always go back to Anthony Richardson until we get to the regular season. Does he start to look the same level of comfortability that he has for most of camp? He didn't look comfortable at times in those 7 plays. I'm not judging him, Jake, in the sense that I think his career's over and, it's a bust. But he did not look the level of comfortability in a small sample size of 7 plays that we saw throughout multiple weeks of camp. So I want to see him look more comfortable, and I'm fascinated to see what they do in the slot if it is indeed A.D. Mitchell's spot if Josh Downs is forced to miss some time.
Yeah, and again, I'm also curious to see, especially because of, and I don't know how much we'll see of Kyler Murray certainly in the game, but through workouts, through practices, whatever else, the pass rush for the Colts does look like it is going to be an area of strength for them. And I think that parlays into one thing that we kind of overlook. One area of alleged weakness about the Colts is the defensive backfield. And we have been jumping up and down, harping up and down. You drive around 465 when it's open, and you're looking at billboards, and there are billboards up that are like, why don't we have a defensive backfield? Why haven't we signed a safety? Why don't we have depth at corner? You go around, you walk into a coffee store, you walk into a bar, you walk into a restaurant in Indianapolis, and within 30 seconds, you hear two guys talking about and jumping up and down about why has Chris Ballard not gone out and signed a veteran safety? Why are we letting other teams bring guys in at a position that's of need? All we heard about for 2 years was Chris Ballard talking about the receiver position, and every time I turn on frickin' Bowen, I hear him talking about receivers, and every time I read Bowen, and we played that sound clip 1,000 times on this station, and yet we kept being told that like Mike Strawn was going to be a guy, and all these guys were, and turns out that became an Achilles, and finally he had to address it.
There's 2 positions this year, by the way. Whereas in years past, it was just really one, wide receiver, corner, whatever the case may be. And I'm still not fully sold on corner this year, but it's safety, and it's that tight end room.
Okay, well, tight end, I agree. But tight end, there's depth. It's depth of the same guy over and over and over, right?
Correct.
There are 5 Honda Civics, and you've got to actually drive through the snow. That's the problem. But in terms of the corner, in terms of the safety, the defensive backfield, there's an area of that we have not gotten into and not talked about, which actually is advantage Chris Ballard. But it's going to take me a minute to explain it, so I'll do it in just a couple of them. So when you look at a defensive backfield in the National Football League or in college football or in high school football or at the Jordan YMCA, whatever it might be, but if you are talking about, and it is a passer-friendly league, it's a more passer-friendly league than ever before. And year by year, that continues to be the case. But one of the ways, if you don't have, and we've gotten on Chris Ballard a lot, myself as much as anybody, about his stubbornness, at least it appears as so, in addressing certain areas. And he has not addressed, and really hasn't even, I don't know how much he's been pressed about it, but going out and signing, getting depth at safety, or do they have really good corners? Or eventually over the course of a year, is a Dallas Flowers going to burn you? Or a Juju Brents, and I do like Juju Brents, but is he going to burn you? I think Kenny Moore, after a down year last year, bounced back, and this year appears to really be able to carry on that. I think that he's a good player. But perhaps, Jimmy, the reason Chris Ballard has not felt the need that everybody else feels about addressing those situations is because if you don't have great secondary, you can offset that sometimes if your receivers of the opponent don't have time to break out and run into a deep set because the quarterback is under duress and has to bail away from a long pass play. And perhaps Chris Ballard looks at it and says, I realize that everybody wants me to have a better secondary, but because of the fact that I now feel very comfortable that we are going to have consistent pass rush and consistent breakdown of the opponent's pass idea, that now takes away from the overall urgency of that, because you can have great corners. You could have Rivas and Sanders as your corners, or insert name of whatever lockdown of your era corner you want to talk about that negates a field. And if you don't have pass rush, eventually the receiver is going to find himself open if he has enough time to run around and find an open seam or make a quick route. You get to a quarterback quickly, though, it doesn't matter if you don't have people back there guarding, because he's got to all of a sudden now improvise and do something different because he doesn't have time in the pocket to find an open guy. And maybe Chris Ballard is saying, between Kwity Paye and Dio, guys that I have already that I felt like were going to be pass rush guys, and DeForest Buckner, needless to say, now you have, and I think Tyquan Lewis has shown a little flash, and now you have Leatu Latu as well. Amongst all of those guys, maybe Chris Ballard is saying, look, I'm going to be bringing so much heat, it doesn't matter what happens with my defensive backfield. Dangerous way to play, I realize, but I don't think that we necessarily take into consideration that factor as much as we should.
He's banking on winning in the trenches and leading to broken plays, turnover-worthy plays, jackpot plays, as they're sometimes referred to. And that's one way to build a team. But the other side to that coin, and it's where you allude to at the end there, Jake, that sometimes it isn't always a good thing, is if you get to the point, and I know most Colts fans would kill for this at this stage, right? You would kill to be back in the playoffs. You would kill to win a division title for the first time in a decade. But once you get to that point and the games change and everything slows down, think about the generational quarterbacks of the last 5 to 10 to 15 years, whether it's Brady, Manning, Mahomes, Burrow, Rodgers. You get to a point where, okay, you're going to bring pass rush. Okay, you're going to blitz the middle linebacker. All right, I'm going to get rid of the ball in 2 seconds. And I'm going to dink and dunk my way down the field, and your corners are either going to have to hold up in man coverage, or we're going to paper cut you to death, and you're going to be back to the drawing board. It works in theory, but there is still blatant areas of concern when you get into the meat and potatoes of a 2-minute drill, of crunch time, of the postseason. And that's not a knock against what they've done up front. I'm very excited about another year of DeForest Buckner. I'm very excited about what Leatu Latu can do as a rookie and another leap forward for Kwity Paye. But outside of Juju Brents, who I think is going to take another step forward this year, and Kenny Moore, who's earned the respect as a veteran, I have a lot of question marks about that secondary, and I still don't know who's playing alongside confidently Julian Blackmon. And there comes a point where the games shift, and if your pass rush is not perfect, all it takes is one apple, two apple, bang, 5-yard completion. Bang, 5-yard completion.
Did you do one apple or one Mississippi?
We did both. Now that I think about it, I debated in my head which one to go with there.
What about blitz? Did you do blitz?
Yeah.
So you're playing backyard Nerf football, right?
Once you got to 5 apple or 5 Mississippi, then you send the rusher.
But so we had the way we played it. So you're on the line.
Yeah.
Mac Ingle drops back with his Nerf football in his backyard, and he mowed it perfectly. It was a great backyard for football. So he's back there throwing, and you have to count. And I think we did a 5 count.
Sure.
One Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, whatever. So he's got that amount of time to get somebody open, and then you go. Yep. Or once every 4 plays, you could just yell blitz, which meant you didn't have to count anymore.
Man.
Yeah. So he snaps the ball, you just go blitz, and you're blitzing, and now all of a sudden he's scrambling all over the place.
I don't know if on the playgrounds of St. Jude Elementary if we had blitz, but we definitively had.
Did you kick extra points?
No. Because it was on the
not extra points. We did do blitz, but you only had a certain amount of blitzes that you could use.
Yeah, we were allowed 1 every 4 sets of downs, right? Now, I have a theory here. My theory is that with young, and I'm not taking anything away from girls here, but I'm going to be a sexist to an extent and say just boys in this. That's unfair, I realize. But I have a theory that for boys, when learning, what age do you learn multiplication tables? Probably 2nd grade, maybe 1st grade?
Probably.
For boys, the easiest multiplication table that they already have mastered is by sevens.
7, yeah.
Because you play backyard football and it's 7, 14, 21, 28,
Correct.
27, 35, 28, 35 because you never kick the extra point. Now, Josh Shimrouse's backyard had a row of bushes that if you kicked over that was the extra point. But unless we were playing there, an away game at Josh Shimrouse's house, it was always just touchdown 7 points. Never did the extra point.
No, same. Yeah, asphalt of St. Jude, you could not get the extra points there. Automatic.
Now, furthermore.
But that's my point, though. Dink and dunk is what can kill you if you're against the elite. Unless your pass rush is truly pristine, you're getting home right there.
When I was mentioning the just how, and everybody knows this, I realize, but it is interesting to go back and find things like this. How passer-friendly the league is today, okay? Now, granted, it's kind of hard to judge because, matter of fact, I've got to go back. What was the last year that they had a 16, was it 21 was a 16-game schedule before they went to?
I think so. It's either 21 or 20.
20. Okay. In 2020, the leading yardage passer in the NFL was Deshaun Watson. 4,823 yards. Probably why he has the highest cap hit now, 4 years later, right?
Yeah.
4,823 yards. Second, Mahomes, 4,740. Third, Brady, 4,633. You've got to go down to 13th before you get anybody under 4,000, Kyler Murray. Okay? If you go to 1985, leading passer Dan Marino, 4,137 yards. And that was like, holy cow, right?
Otherworldly.
That would put him 11th in the last year of 16. I mean,
I bet you get the same
11th in 1985. Neil Lomax of the St. Louis Cardinals at 3,214 yards.
Guarantee you get the same dramatic effect if you look at running backs then versus running backs now in terms of where those stats were.
Can you imagine the number of rushing touchdowns?
Oh man,
back then.
Yeah, different game.
Let's remind ourselves as we're talking the Anthony Richardson era of the brilliance of passing that was the 1985 Indianapolis Colts. Your starter, of course, was Mike Pagel. He started in 14 of 16 games that year. And you ready for this? Completed 50.6% of his passes for 2,414 yards and 14 touchdowns. Against 15 interceptions.
A lot of injuries that season. Only played a couple games, did he?
Can you imagine that?
That's basically what Kyler Murray's number was in 11 games last year.
The other two starters that year, Matt Kofler got a start, and then, of course, Art Schlichter, who took the under and threw for 107 yards. Unbelievable. But again, going back to it, I think that pass rush is going to be really good for the Colts this year, but it's going to have to be.
Yeah. I mean,
right?
I do too. Like it is undoubtedly their biggest strength defensively is that core led by DeForest Buckner. And as I mentioned, Kwity Paye and what Latu is going to be able to do. I think it'll get them far. But the question remains, and this is, I guess, a good thing for Chris Ballard, Jake. I think you'd agree with this. If the pass rush is established this year, and it's clear going into the 2025 offseason, they have 3 things to fix. Safety, corner, and tight end. You would take those problems. That's not a long checklist of stuff to address. I don't know that
tight end is an area they need to fix as much as they just got to figure it out, right?
I feel like they've been trotting out, and this isn't fully fair to Kylan Granson, but I feel like they've been trotting out the same 4 or 5 names since Jack Doyle, trying to convince me they're going to be top 15,
That's
top
fair.
20 in the league, and they're not.
It's hard to argue that.
Maybe Granson does that. It again, 7 series does not, or not 7 series, 7 plays does not make an entire evaluation on a player, but he targeted Granson twice. What does he do in joint practices? Is Granson a go-to target for him? Does he become a safety valve? Maybe there's a budding connection there. But outside of something like that happening, nobody of Will Mallory, Molly Cox, Jelani Woods, or Kylan Granson have shown me that they belong in. My bar is low. I'm not asking for Kelsey. I'm saying make a top 20 list at the position. I don't think that's hard.
I feel like here's the problem with the Colts tight end room, okay? I feel like the Colts tight end room, you open the closet up, and there's 4 pair of Timberland hiking boots, 1 pair of high-top basketball shoes, and you're actually wanting to go run the mini marathon. They're all very serviceable and good things. In one of them, Will Mallory seemingly might have a little bit more flexibility than the others. And I only say that because he looks like a yard after catch guy a little bit more than the others, although I like Moali Cox in that regard to an extent.
When you're not wearing your
but there's no breakaway guy, right?
When you're not wearing your, which I really love and praise you about him every day, when you're not wearing your BMW shoes, what's your most comfortable all-around everyday shoe?
Oh, man.
Or brand.
I'm a bad person because I have a shoe problem.
I know.
You guys think my cologne thing's bad? A pair of Echoes. I got a pair of Echo black tennis walking shoes that are unbelievable.
Okay, that's what I want. I don't need elite, Nike Air Jordans. I want an all-around shoe, all-around tight end that is just middle of the pack, but a consistent guy that's doing them. Obviously, things are going to change schematically if you're looking at having a heavy set package with more of a blocking tight end there. I get that, but
those are still a dime a dozen in the NFL.
I'm asking for David Njoku. That's not
okay. He's still a dime a dozen.
Okay, but he's like he's a 12 to 16 range tight end.
Oh, he's top.
Okay, all right. Well, here was my point a couple weeks ago. If you look at any statistical ranking system of tight ends in the National Football League, there's a list of top 32 tight ends. No Colt is on that list.
You go back to your fantasy. You guys were talking about
for.
Fantasy earlier. Go to the ESPN.com fantasy football rankings, and every tight end for the Colts is like 85 to 105.
Correct.
Right? Yeah. Now, this from Matt. Hey, guys, 5 Mississippi and 1 blitz per 4 downs. Full tackle, no pads? Absolutely. Hell yes, Matt. You're exactly right. Now, the better question is this, though. The Nerf football, and I'm old enough that we had the Nerf footballs before it had like the little whistling things on them and all. Just a standard Nerf football. They were the best. One side, 2 different colors. The one I had was red on the top, white on the bottom. It was awesome. Once the paint started falling off of that thing, that's when you got the best grip. But you had to, if you were a true devout weekend warrior, Nerf football, backyard, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi guy, you had to take your Nerf football, soak it in water, let it dry out, and then kind of harden. And that thing at that point was, you were Dan Marino, baby. You weren't Mike Pagel. You were Marino back there. And those things they were awesome.
Eddie, do you remember the Nerf ball?
Yes.
I think you know exactly where I'm going with, but I want to ask it for the audience.
Remember all of them.
Do you remember the Nerf football that they came out probably 04, maybe 03, where you could pop it open and draw a play on there?
Yep.
And then throw the thing? But if you threw that thing too hard, like it was thick, like it would deck you, jam a finger or two in there.
So you drew a play on the ball?
So the ball opened up,
Yeah.
kind of like a quarterback's sleeve would,
Okay.
and it had like a magic marker type pad where you could just draw. Hey, I want you to go run an out route, and you could draw it on the play.
What'd you do with
in
the
the
little
huddle.
marker dealio?
Well, no, you could just do it with your finger. It was
Okay.
like a magic eraser pad
Okay,
where it went
okay.
away after you wrote it, but you close it and then you throw the football. But it was because of that little mechanism in there to close the play sleeve. It was a heavier ball, so if you got
Whatever happened to a stick in the
quarterback
dirt? You do it a stick in the dirt. Here you go. You boom right here.
Or
there
you just
go.
draw it on the football. Not like in
Sure,
this
you could-
instance, but
you
like
could-
you hold the football up
Well, I
on the
know, but like,
and then
To
that's
be
the beauty
clear,
of the dirt.
I'm not saying one way was better than the other. I was mainly taking myself and Eddie and listeners in our age
Now, here's the
range
thing.
on a trip down memory
But
lane.
you probably did that, and it was awesome at first, and then after a while,
Correct.
you're like, I don't
yes,
need this.
because the ball was heavier. It's
You know-
like, man, I don't want to jam my finger on this thing.
So you think that stuff, you think that what we're talking about just sounds like backyard sandlot football, but I was talking once when I was doing a radio thing with Jeff George, and Jeff George he had Randy Moss as a rookie, as a teammate in Minnesota. I think it was Dante Culpepper got hurt. You'll have to look this up. Maybe it was second year, but I'm pretty sure it was first year. And he's in the huddle, and he's calling a play, and Randy Moss is like a wide-eyed rookie, has like no idea. And Jeff George said literally he would look at Randy Moss, and he's like, hey, man, just like 20 yards out and to the left. And he told me not only was Randy Moss an unbelievable player, but Jeff also, anytime I've ever brought it up, has said that Randy Moss is one of the best teammates he ever had. So I think the perception is not there in terms – I think Moss has really helped his image now. But as a player, people thought like – but he was like, no, he was such a freak athlete and so good you could just say, go out and do that, and I'll throw it to you, and he would get it every time. That looks way too complex.
There's a look at that bad boy. So it kind of has like an NFL blitz. If you ever played that video game summary of routes or common things you could run, and then it has a little pad. Once you open it up, you can draw the play. Feel like you're actually, in a real NFL huddle.
I
But
would
that
have,
thing,
I
it
would
was-
have loved that, but it looks way too complex.
They Hasbro announced a recall of the Nerf Big Play football because it contained a hard plastic interior frame that posed a risk of
Yeah, of
facial
course.
cuts if it hits a child during
Of
play.
course. I mean, I could have told you that
Many,
one coming down
many
Meridian.
a hand or face were cut if you missed that
Little
ball.
Tommy Baldwin of Mesa, Arizona, got hit in the. Yeah, of course. Here's the era that I had back in my day when I was. This is the era of Nerf football I had. Just the standard, two-colored Nerf football.
Yep.
Foam with paint on it, and then the paint
Yep.
would eventually wear off, and you soaked it, and it got wet. They were the best, man.
Just tape 5 wiffle balls together into a football shape and just go in there in the dirt.
I think
and-
I actually, I'm going to confess something, and then you guys tell me if you think it's lame or cool.
8 people needed stitches, by the way, from that Nerf football.
Of course. Little Tommy Baldwin in Mesa, Arizona took one right there, just above the nose line, and boom, needed stitches, right?
Yep.
Nate Atkins is going to join us coming up top of the hour. We will get into the Colts and the Cardinals, and I'll let you guys tell me if I'm cool or lame for my 1982 Nerf football confession next. There's a new segment here. I don't know what we're going to call it, but we already introduced earlier that we're going to do a fantasy football league for Query and Company, for the company members. And the winner of the fantasy league, one of the great prizes that we're going to give, and we might get other people on board with this to sponsor and come up with actual legitimate prizes, because this is what we do. We come up with things off the top of our head, and then we got to follow, then we got to chase it, right? But in our fantasy football league, what we're going to do is, if you win the league, the three of us, that being myself, Jimmy, and Eddie, we'll chip in to do this. But if you win the fantasy football league for Query Company, give me a team name off the top of your head, Jimmy Cook, for one of our listeners.
For a fantasy football team name?
Not for you, but for we're coming up with a fictional little Tommy Baldwin. He's in our fantasy league, and he wins the league, okay? So his team name is what?
Richardson's Rough Riders.
Okay, Richardson's Rough Riders. And he wins the league because the guy that he drafted that carries him and scores the most points for him over the course of the season is who?
We'll say Anthony Richardson because he named the team after him.
Okay, so in that example, you would win a Colts hat and a Florida T-shirt. So, or the other way around. But whatever player gets you the most points to win our league, the prize is that you get a hat and a T-shirt representing that team, that player's franchise and college.
Yep.
Okay. So here's my question for you. The new segment that I'm making up here is, am I lame or is this cool? Okay. In this case, it would be, was I lame or was this cool?
All right.
When I was probably, I'm going to guesstimate 9 to 10 years old, and we would play sports after school, depending on whatever season it was. I played a ton of backyard football. In the summertime, we played home run derby and a lot of pickup basketball, and then obviously indoor basketball, pickup games on the weekends, etc. But probably football was the sport that was my first love sport of playing with my friends in the yard, everything else. And I had a red and white Parker Brothers, the foam Nerf football, the original Nerf football. And I loved that thing, loved it, to the point where I was too old to have a stuffed animal that I carried around. I had a stuffed cow when I was a kid that I carried around everywhere, still have it, mind you. But because I was too old to have a stuffed animal to carry around, because I would have been mocked for that, I carried the Nerf football everywhere, I think including probably laid next to me in my bed when I went to bed at night. Now, is that lame or is that cool? Acceptable or not acceptable?
You were how old?
I'd say 9 to 10, maybe 11.
Well, acceptable. You're a kid.
Eddie?
You're a kid.
Acceptable.
Now, if the question was I was 33 years old, they would be like, it's kind of lame, Jake. But since you were a youth,
What about if I still have cow?
No, it's fine.
Okay, cool. I like that.
Yeah. Childhood memories. I'm cool to hang. I mean, if you're keeping everything, maybe not, but there's one or two things that are really close
Fair
to the
enough.
heart. Yeah, you keep them.
All right, Nate Atkins next. By the way, meant to thank Heston that dropped off some Butler Blue, Cool Blue, right? For
Cool
us,
Blue, yep.
which is available at Butler games, is it not?
It is correct.
I ran into him yesterday at the fair, and he asked me about it. I said, "Oh man, I still have yet to try it. Did try it last night. Outstanding. Kind of a, I don't know, like a blue raspberry spritzer. We'll call it that.
Yeah,
with a little kick to it.
Nice
Very
little berry vodka combination, indeed.
Very
yep.
good. Colts in action coming up. Practice getting underway, 6 o'clock, Grand Park in Westfield. J&B will be out there broadcasting live. Nate Atkins will certainly be covering that from the Indianapolis Star. He joins us now on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Nate, I will begin with the generic question first, which is, now that we are seeing the Colts going against another team for more than just a preseason game, but doing actual consistent workouts against them, who is the player that most intrigues you, that you want to see how they look now that they're going up against a different uniform?
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of good options, but what kind of jumps out to me right now is I want to see how Nick Cross and the free safeties look going up against Marvin Harrison Jr. So obviously a lot of fans in Indy are going to have their eyes on Jr. After they had to give up the dream of eventually landing him here in Indy. And it's going to be kind of the first real test that we've seen for Nick Cross against another team this year. One of the only tests he's gotten in a long time, since he just hasn't played that much. But, you know, he got to start the game against the Broncos in the preseason. They liked somehow he played at free safety, though the Broncos didn't really go after him. They're not really built to go down the field that way. They just kind of attack those outside corners and live that way. But I think you're going to see that in this one. The Cardinals love to go down the field, getting Kyler Murray on the move and throwing down the field to Marvin Harrison Jr. So Nick Cross has really got to step up and take this competition the next couple of days, because it's just been so up and down. You know, he had the reception on Anthony Richardson last Monday that seemed to be starting something. Then he, got involved in that hit that hurt Josh Downs, and he's been taken in and out of the starting spot at free safety a lot. They let him run there against the Broncos, but this will be one of the first tests to see kind of how he handles and can hold up in coverage, because they kind of like how he's handling some of the run fits, the way he's taking away some of these runs to the sideline. But what they want to see more of is balls or plays from him near the ball, when the ball is thrown near his way. So I think going up against Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be one of the best tests for that.
Nate, there's no doubt that you want to see growth from these tests for the secondary, but ultimately this team knows that its biggest strength is getting after the quarterback and making it so the stress is not on the secondary more often than not. Going into joint practices, how will guys up front like DeForest Buckner, like Leatu Latu, like Kwity Paye be tested to try to show we can be relied upon to take pressure off of the secondary?
I think it'll be a good test for them, because it's the first time that they've gotten to go against a mobile quarterback other than their own, which they're being, of course, incredibly careful with. I think if anyone right now in the Colts touches Anthony Richardson, that's going to be one of the easiest cuts Chris Ballard has to make. So this isn't supposed to be, they're not supposed to hit Kyler Murray, but I do think they're going to try and get closer to him, try and rattle him. And he's a different kind of mobile than Anthony, than a lot of players. He's that kind of quick jitterbug who can is just too fast to catch for a lot of defensive linemen. So it's a good test for them, because so far that pass rush has looked awesome. It's looked every bit as good as it's supposed to, with Leatu Latu coming in looking like that day one pass rusher. Kwity Paye dropping about 8 pounds, looking quicker around the edge. DeForest Buckner's had an amazing camp, and then he had a couple of rest days, including the preseason games, so he could get ready for these tests against the Cardinals. Dino Dangbo has been slowed by the calf injury, but he's back now. And Tyquan Lewis, in the brief amount he played against the Broncos, that's about as much as I've seen him flash a good player, but he looked to get to the level.
Nate, we talked about
that, because that you just got to carry him for sure.
Sorry about that, Nate. We talked earlier with a writer from Arizona and was asking him this question. I'll ask you the same as to whether Shane Steichen might have mentioned anything of this sort. When you're going against another team for a couple of joint practices and then in preseason, when you have camaraderie with and have worked on the same staff as the coach you're going against, has Shane Steichen offered whether or not there will be any preferred designed plays from Arizona? In other words, is it possible that Steichen will say, hey, look, I really want to test out Nick Cross, or I really want to test out what we do here. Can you run a couple of sets like this at our preference so I can get a read? Would they agree to anything like that ahead of time?
I think they probably talk a little bit about kind of what they're trying to get out of this, and certainly they reach an agreement on certain portions of practice, like how much they want to go after red zone, how much they want to work kind of the deep passing. So I think there is a little bit of give and take there. There's also a little bit of just competitive edge to it, too, because it's one of the few moments that the coaches get to sort of scheme against someone that they're not directly working with. And so while they know each other from Philadelphia, you know, there's an element of them where they're going to try and catch the other one off guard, too. So I do think the familiarity helps them. That's kind of why this joint practice came together as easily as it did for two sessions, because Gannon and Steichen know each other. So they'll certainly work on areas that they both want to kind of develop, but at the same time, to try to throw different wrinkles within those settings that can surprise the other one and try and hit some explosive plays.
Nate Atkins is our guest, covers the Colts for the Indy Star, and he joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Nate, I've mentioned this a lot the last couple of days, but there has been a sense from Anthony Richardson of just being comfortable at camp, and we didn't see that as much in the small sample size in the preseason meeting against the Broncos. How do they work to get him comfortable out of the gate in both the joint practices and then if we see him at all the rest of the preseason?
I think what's going to be key with the joint practices is just having a little bit longer runway to get into things. You know, he got 4 passes against the Broncos in the preseason game, and one thing I've noticed out of him in that game and a lot of practices is he just needs to settle in a little bit. The more that it feels like football, the more that he's on the move and having to kind of build things on his own, the better he plays. So when you watch him at practice and they're throwing one-on-ones or they move into 7-on-7, that's when his accuracy tends to be at its worst, when he'll kind of sail throws. When he's back there against a pass rush and he's on the move in these 11-on-11 settings, you see a lot more of the player that can throw on the move, be comfortable within that chaos, and uses the skills that they love the most, which is his ability to navigate within the pocket, get out of pressure, get into safer situations, and still be able to throw the ball or run it. So I think just having a longer leash, 2 days of practices, it's not going to be a ton because, of course they're going to trade off and get Joe Flacco in there some. They're not going to only use the first team, but it's going to be more than just the 4 passes against the Broncos, and it's a way to build it throughout 2 days against one opponent where they try some things today, they build on that, try some things tomorrow. So I think that's really the big benefit of having those back-to-back days of joints for Anthony, and it's a big reason why they're leaning into these joints to get their work in, and why if they felt like they did last year, I don't expect these starters to play in the preseason game against the Cardinals on this Saturday night because they're getting that work in these next 2 days.
Nate, be it in a good direction or bad direction, Nate Atkins, Indy Star, our guest on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Be it in a good direction or bad direction, the player whose trajectory has most surprised you through camp is who?
I'm going to say I think Alec Pierce has really taken to this camp in a way that I don't know that everyone on the outside was prepared for. There's a lot of hype with a pick like A.D. Mitchell, who comes in with what we've come to understand as first-round abilities, but slid for some different concerns. And I think a lot of people on the outside were just ready for them to just make that switch, thinking that they drafted him to replace Alec Pierce, who hasn't produced a ton in his first 2 years. And I always thought it was going to be, that they wanted to use both of them. But it was our first look at Alec Pierce getting a chance to actually compete for a role. When they brought him in a couple years ago, that was when they absolutely had to take a receiver in the second round, and they did. The position was his last year. The position was just his. This is the first time he's had to really level up his game. And I think all that hype to A.D. Mitchell and the way people have moved on, I think it affected Alec a little bit. It motivated him a little bit. I sensed that in the spring. He was just talking a little bit different. And he gained a little bit of weight in this offseason. He started to focus on parts of his game that maybe he didn't have to before, maybe he didn't know to. It's just some of the maturation that's come in his third season, and you're seeing him go down the field and make these plays pretty consistently. The exact reason they brought him in was a one-trick kind of deal where he can fly down the field on 9 routes, fades, posts, and be this guy that creates explosive plays on low volume. We haven't gotten to see many opportunities of that in his career so far because they haven't had that quarterback. They have not had that strong of a quarterback outside of a very small stable with Anthony Richardson. So I think part of that's been unfair to him. Also, I think part of that has led him to maybe be a little less engaged and locked into his role because those opportunities aren't there. But they're here right now. The pressure's on him with A.D. Mitchell coming in, and he's been better than Mitchell so far, quite frankly. Now, they need both of them at the moment because Josh Downs is out, and they're playing A.D. Mitchell in the slot. And even when Josh Downs comes back, I still think they plan to use both of them. But Alec has definitely attacked this camp like a player who does not want to be forgotten, and he has exposed the secondary several times. And so that's been very encouraging to see, especially for an offense. One of the biggest things they want to add this year is those explosive pass plays down the field, which they couldn't get to with Gardner Minshew, but they want to get to it with Anthony Richardson, or if they need to with Joe Flacco. It's going to be a big, big part of their game, and I think Alec has answered the bell so far.
On the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line, Colts beat writer for the Indy Star, Nate Atkins, joins us. You can follow him on Twitter at @NateAtkins_. Nate, you had a story come out earlier this week. We talked about the importance of the pass rush, but you highlight how important of a year this is for Kwity Paye. We've seen steady growth for him, no more so than last year. In the story that you posted on IndyStar.com, what has changed the most from him this offseason to where he is set up for another career year, another step forward in a Colts uniform?
Yeah, so the issue is when you look at Kwity Paye, when I was diving into him this offseason, you see, some positives. He played 16 games for the first time. He had 8.5 sacks. That was a career high. But his pressure rate had really plummeted. It was an all-time low for his career. Pretty much he had 9 quarterback hits in those 8.5 sacks. And so he was kind of a guy benefiting in the pass rush from the situation they had, but not really bringing a lot on his own. And that caught up to them late in the year when teams would go in max protection. And as games wore on, he started to feel lethargic. All that he had put into being kind of this big end for them and being so great against the run, that didn't end up having as big of a payoff as he wanted when it came time to beat C.J. Stroud and make those plays in a shootout. And so that kind of fueled a different approach this offseason. And then it was a kind of turbulent for him this offseason, wondering whether they would pick up his fifth-year option, watching them, try and go after Danielle Hunter in free agency and then end up, drafting the first defender in the draft and Leatu Latu. But it was once they picked up the fifth-year option, that kind of channeled him to a point where he kind of realized they still see him as that player that he once was. They really need him to get there right now. So he decided to kind of ditch the old approach of just be this big end and make the pass rush work however you make it work to really becoming that slim-down rusher. So he initially dropped 15 pounds, added about 7 of it back through weight training, but he just feels a lot lighter. He looks a lot lighter. It was 4 to 5 workouts a day in California to do it. So we'll see how it pays off. I mean, a lot of guys this time of year, you get a lot of stories about guys coming in the best shape of their lives. He's not the only guy in the NFL who's worked really hard this offseason. So we still have to see that play out. But I definitely think the fit is there for him to trade a little bit of that run defense for just more juice in the pass rush. And it's not going to be the sack total that you have to watch because he still had 8.5 last year. It's that pressure total, that QB hit total. Is he affecting passers the way that he needs to? Because if he does, and you add that in with DeForest Buckner, Leatu Latu, and Dio Dengbo, there's too many guys to block on this line. Too many fast, explosive pass rushers all of a sudden to block if he's able to do that. And obviously with what they got going on in the secondary, it's absolutely critical that he does. So I think all of that kind of combined with just how much is on the defensive line, how many other guys they can pivot to with Latu here now, even though Samson Ebicom went down, but they re-signed Tyquan Lewis, and just the need to, he's got that fifth year locked in, but he wants an extension here too. He wants to keep making money beyond next season, and so this year's going to be really, really big to do that. And so far, he does look slimmed down and fast enough to have a chance to do it.
Nate, I assume right now, Nate Atkins, that you're driving your car. Is that correct?
That's correct. I
Okay.
decided to try and beat some of the traffic to the joint
That's-
prices tonight that they're starting at 6.
Smart play. Now, the reason I mentioned it is because I wanted you to do an exercise of closing your eyes, but we're not going to do the closing your eyes aspect because that would be dangerous, right? So,
Yeah, I probably shouldn't.
but we're going to go to an imaginary world here. We're going to go off into the future. We're going to go into mid-November here, okay? All of a sudden it's gray outside, it's sleeting rain, and you are just getting ready to sit down and write a column after a Colts game because the Colts just got a big win that puts them in position now to win the AFC South, and it all came down to a 4th and goal where Anthony Richardson hit the tight end in the back of the end zone, and you write a column and you say, Anthony Richardson found his target, the tight end blank in the back of the end zone, and he made the play that is the reason he was selected in camp as the Colts' primary tight end. That player is who?
As of right now, I would have to say that I'm going to cheat a little bit, but I'm going to say that's Mo Alley Cox on a play-action design that Shane Steichen tricks the defense on. Because that's actually, I think, his one role is going to be in those 4th down. Almost all his catches are going to be trick plays, 4th downs, play action. When you double tight end type situations, he's like that forgotten man at the back of the end zone. But going to more what I think you're getting at is what tight end do I think will actually can emerge to be that go-to guy. It needs to be Jelani Woods. Jelani Woods, if you look at him, is the only one who's really been a legit draft investment here. The other guys they've drafted in the 4th, 5th, 6th round type areas. Mo Alley Cox had kind of found diamond in the rough and kept him. But Jelani Woods was a 3rd round pick, and that was after just 1 year of playing it in college. And so far, those other guys, none of them have shown, whether it's training camp, last year on the field, none of them have shown an upside that would block Jelani Woods' breakout. Now, the thing is, we have not seen the Jelani Woods ascension this camp. He's been working with the 2nd team, 3rd team sometimes. He's had some drops. I think he's had some nice plays in the open field as well. I talked to him just the other day. He does not seem at all worried about it. They don't talk as if they're worried about him. It's almost like they expected him to be really slow out of the gates after missing a year of football at a position that's so hard to transition to. But he does have to get going. I mean, we're here at halfway through the preseason just about, and you want to feel like he's a starting tight end here. He needs to be that this year for that position to be at all his strength. And so I'm still a believer in him because, I think he's over the health issues, and I think it's easy to forget, but he was really explosive his first year where 16 of his 25 catches went for first downs. He averaged like 12.5 yards a catch. Had that game winner against the Chiefs. He has that. He looks like that athlete still that is one of the most athletic bodies a tight end prospect has ever had in NFL history. And so he's got to catch up the rest of the stuff, the chemistry with Anthony Richardson, which he's not working with yet, the route running and the focus on the hands. But I think he's one of those players that I think people focus a little too much on drops where, there's players that will drop the ball on occasion, but if they make up for it with explosive plays that other players are simply not built for, you can live with the drop some. So he's dropping it more than maybe Mo Alley Cox or Kylan Granson or Drew Ogletree, but he has so much more natural ability than any of those players at this stage of their careers. So he needs to be the guy that would take off. If he does, I think it's a pretty great fit with Shane Steichen, the way that he's going to draw up RPO designs, play action, tight end screens. It's all kind of built for Jelani Woods to be that guy. It's just been curious so far that they've not tried it with the first team, but I'm really curious to watch these 3 joint practices over the next 2 weeks to see if they elevate him after he showed a little bit more in that preseason game the other night.
Colts beat writer Nate Atkins joins us. Nate, in that same vein, and admittedly, you kind of tip your hand with part of your answer there, but and I know he was hurt last year, so it's not fair, but that Chiefs play you talk about that we remember so fondly was over a year ago, and all the ways that you and others describe Jelani Woods is stuff like, oh man, the way this guy's built, it all sounds like pre-draft hype for a player that you think is going to turn into that player, but sometimes life doesn't work out that way. Again, I think you already answered this to some extent, but not directly. Are the whispers of him maybe not even making the roster real, or do you think that's all just training camp chatter, and with how wide open that room is, he's still going to have a good chance to be on the 53-man?
I think it's a fair conversation just because of the other players that they have. There's 4 other tight ends that look like they can or should make the team. The 3 I mentioned, and Will Mallory is the one I kind of forgot to throw in there, but he flashed a little bit late last year, and they just drafted him a year ago, so it seems like he'll be back. It was something I asked Jim Cooter about just yesterday, and he really didn't have any explanation for why Jelani Woods isn't practicing with the first team, except that they want to get him maybe a little bit more volume in the passing game and test some things. But, yeah, it's not set in stone that he's going to make it. He's just, to me, the highest upside option, and that's why ultimately I think he will make it, is that it's kind of like, why not? Like, you can keep these other players, and they each do something well. You know, Mo Cox and Drew Ogletree can block. Kylan Granson and Will Mallory can split off and run some short area routes. They don't have anybody that projects to be able to do it all except Jelani Woods. And I think he's come a nice way as a blocker. You saw that in the preseason game compared to where he was a couple of years ago, where that was a big problem for him. He's got to put it together. But, when I compare him to some other players, I do give him a little bit more of a pass because he lost the year to injury. There's been other players that had that opportunity and haven't taken it yet. That's why I think that's why I'm a little bit more critical or tough maybe on Nick Cross, is that he hasn't dealt with any injuries. There's not been anything holding him back from being that athlete they drafted him to be, except he's got to go out there and do it. So Jelani Woods eventually does have to do it. You don't want to get into a spot where we're talking to him like we talked about Paris Campbell, where the injuries just took too much out, too much time passed. But I think the difference right now is that it was 1 year of injuries for Jelani Woods, and he seems over. It doesn't seem like those injuries diminish his athleticism. Not that I can see, not that I can tell. Maybe they're seeing something different, and that's why they're playing him a little bit lower. But Jelani Woods is a guy who's always really been really self-aware. Former quarterback, really seems aware of a lot of what's going on and the chatter about him and the situations he's in. And he did not seem remotely worried about it the other day. So we'll see how it develops this week. But I know some other people have him not on the roster. I still think he'll be there because I think when Shane Steichen and Jim Bob Cooter and Chris Ballard look at this, there's one tight end who has a chance to be a difference maker in this offense, and that's number 80.
Nate will be reading the coverage. Appreciate the time today on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line, and certainly drive safe in avoiding the traffic up to Westfield.
Yep, will do. Thanks for having me.
All right, Nate Atkins of the Indianapolis Star joining us on the program. Interesting conversation about Jelani Woods. A year ago, some of those whispers you were talking about, Jimmy, with Jelani Woods was the fact that the hamstring didn't get healthy partially because he was out of shape. Now, whether that's true or not, I have no idea. But clearly they have seen a lot in him and believe a lot in him.
That would help. As Analogy King, do you agree with what I'm saying there? The way people talk about Jelani Woods, it sounds like what you hear going into a draft. Oh, this guy, the athleticism,
yes.
He plays the position perfectly.
Correct.
If he translates.
The upside's there, etc.
And I don't argue with that. He has the body type for it, but still, and I get it, it's not fully fair with the injury he suffered last year. But he is a microcosm of that entire room, having, like I mentioned earlier, just a bunch of names trying to fill a void post Jack Doyle that they haven't been able to do. And I would agree with Nate. He probably has the highest upside with build, but ultimately, if they're not going to put him out there and he's not going to be running with the ones, what is that other than a clear indication of either he's not ready or you have him further down the depth chart than maybe people perceive he should be?
Right. No, you're right. It is so hard to determine which of these guys is the one that it feels like he's the one that they most wanted to work with.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Mo Alley Cox, you could say that, but he's kind of gotten his fair shot, right? I mean,
yeah. And Nate's right too about the draft capital. Like, it's a third-round selection. That's significant for a tight end.
Correct.
Like, it is. And they have not made an effort outside of him in those first 3 rounds for that position because they've had other needs. And I get why you'd want to make that work. But at some point, and Jake, I know I can't keep clinging to this, but it's one of those things where once you've learned about it or once you know the facts out there, now I start to think that the Colts are really thinking this way. Ever since we learned from off-season, or whatever the word is, I think it's off-season.
Yes.
Thank you. Off-season with the New York Giants, that they tried to trade up for somebody. whether it was a Dunze or whether it was Brock Bowers, which I want to say it was Bowers, it was clear to them if it was Bowers, they need an answer in that room. And I don't think they feel like they have it right now.
I think they tried to trade up a couple times. One was to get a wide receiver. The other was to get Bowers. I don't think they were trying to get up there with New York for Bowers. I think that was for Neighbors or a Dunze.
That's fair. But either way,
I think they were just in the market of trying to trade up to get somebody else to go with Michael Pittman Jr. because we've seen it allegedly that they called for Justin Jefferson.
But in regard to that position, specifically tight end, whether it was 8 or whether it was somewhere else, you're in my camp of I believe they tried to go fix that position in the draft, and either the cost was too much or they couldn't get there. And then you look back at this depth chart and you say to yourself, there are good role-playing tight ends on this roster. I'm not trying to say they don't belong on NFL rosters, but what this scheme for Shane Steichen looks like moving forward in 2-3 years from now, assuming Anthony Richardson pans out, I would like a Dallas Goedert, who I admit is a really good tight end, or worse, for Anthony Richardson and for Shane Steichen's play calling acumen, and that is not on the roster right now.
I'd like to know this, which is a longer wait? The amount of time that the Colts have waited for Mo Alley Cox to become a breakthrough tight end, although I think he's a pretty good player. The amount of time that they've had patience with Jelani Woods, or the amount of time that Eddie and I waited in traffic to get into the State Fair yesterday, separately.
Based on firsthand accounts, I have to say the State Fair.
Dykton was right. Dykton apparently this morning said Indy 500, and I said the exact same thing. I texted somebody and said, this is Indy 500 level traffic yesterday. I've never seen anything like it. It was incredible.
How'd they know you were going to be there?
Yeah, that's it, right? Now, I am going to be there 4 o'clock today, Dairy Bar. If you're near the fair, you got to come by and make a monetary
donation.
Largest
milkshake.
Let me tell you something. What did we go over with the Starbucks sizes earlier?
Grande.
What's the biggest?
Trenta.
Okay.
30 ounces.
I'm telling you right now, the milkshake that I will make for you is Trenta Grande. I mean, I'm talking,
we're talking
like
big gulp level milkshake here.
I have no skill in my life, literally no skill set. The only skill set that I have is I can take a soft serve. The way that I can manipulate and stack up a milkshake is unbelievable.
How about the humility there?
I was going to throw that in there too. That's up on the list. You said you have no skill set.
He has no skill in life. Wow, that's a big step.
I thought you were saying the skill is humility. I was going to say that's got to be up at the top.
My list of things that people see about me that they list as being great.
Yes.
Humility is usually at the top of the list. But I'm the first to admit, I don't know if I do this job well, but if I leave this one or lose this one, I'm really in trouble because I know nothing else I can do in life except for I could work at a place with soft serve ice cream. But most places, the machine's broken 4 days a week. And then you're really tapping into the number of days I'm available. and so, but I'm telling you, if you come out 4 o'clock, I'll be with Derek Schultz at 4 o'clock at the Dairy Bar at the Indiana State Fair. And we will be at one of the windows serving dairy products, whether it be grilled cheese, whether it be hand-dipped ice cream, whatever it is that you want. It is on the house. However, we are simply asking for donations to the Great American Milk Drive, which provides milk to needy families, needy kids, etc. And my goal is to raise as much money as possible, not because of the philanthropic nature of it, because of the competitive nature, because I've already seen what one of the TV stations came up with, and I want to beat them.
I respect that. That's the competitive drive there.
Yes. I want to make sure that we raise more money. I want to make it worth their while that they had us out there and that I gave away 246 pounds of milkshakes.
And I hope you do that as well so I can ride your coattails next year and get another blue ribbon blueberry milkshake
right.
on the house.
And some Swiss grilled cheese sandwiches and the whole deal. Now, Eddie, last night when we saw you, you were enjoying a strawberry milkshake at the fair,
correct.
Right? What other foods did you indulge?
I had a Swiss grilled cheese on rye.
The best, right?
It was good. Had the pulled pork on the fried biscuit with the apple barbecue sauce.
How was that?
Oh, it was delicious.
Okay.
I will say it's a little sugary. It was a little too sweet.
You think?
Did either of you go lemon shake-up? I can't go to the fair without getting a lemon shake-up.
We did get
I did not get a lemon shake-up.
All right.
And that was about it.
All right. I also like the potatoes, like the little circular potatoes on a stick. It's another corner of the fair. But
one thing that I found interesting.
Corn on the cob. Had one of those.
Nice.
I found this interesting, and I'm not making light of it. although they're not going to know if I am. But something I found interesting yesterday at the State Fair that I think had to have been a first time. It took me a second to realize what I was seeing, and then I saw it, and I said to myself, "This needs to be documented because I'll bet it's never happened before." And it blew me away. That and Jimmy's plays of the day coming up in about 20 minutes from right now, as a matter of fact. By the way, I believe. Now, is it a GIF or a GIF?
It's hotly contested. I go GIF.
What does it stand for? Graphic something?
Yeah, it might be a graphic image file. I could be making that up.
Okay, so if it's graphic image,
I would put me way off on that.
That would be
by the
GIF
way.
then, right? Because the G for
well,
graphic.
so the person that created it though is on record and said it's GIF.
Well,
but culturally, people say it's GIF.
Okay.
So
well, GIF is what I say.
that works. Twitter.
That
X.
song right there led to the great.
That's right.
One of the great GIFs of all time. Because when I was at the concert and I panned over to Shannon singing along to that song, and I will simply say that the eye contact and the singing aspect will list as sultry, right? Would that be correct, Eddie? Would you agree?
Sure.
And, well, watch yourself there, pal.
Sure.
And so I made a GIF of it, and I would say that it's sultry.
I'm starting to agree with Derek, by the way,
What's that?
that you're in need of constant gratification of people and how they view Shannon
Yeah,
to make yourself feel better.
No. It's, I want to make sure that she's aware. So last night,
Even
at
though
the
she
fair,
doesn't know you have a radio program.
she does not know that I have a radio show. That's right. She was like, "Why are all these people
Very-
saying hi to you at the fair?" I'm
Very
like, I don't
counterintuitive, don't you think?
know. I don't know, Shannon. There's a lot of
Except
people.
she did say that she's heard a lot about me, so I'm very intrigued on how she knows a lot about me.
she. I don't know if you know this or not, right? She thinks I still work at the cigar store and that you work there with me. We were at the fair. What do they call the thing? The people mover deal? The Sky Ride?
Yeah.
Sky Ride, of course, is a moving electric ride that you get on. You sit on it, and the little latch comes over, and you're probably 25, 30 feet in the air. And you go along the main thoroughfare in between the Coliseum and the grandstand, right?
Yeah.
And we're walking along, and I'm always like, oh, we should do that. She doesn't want to do it. I get it. And then I look up, and I've never seen this before. And I'm saying this somewhat flippantly of the low-hanging fruit here, but also I found it fascinating. Everyone on it was Amish. Now, I don't know, and I understand. I mean, there's a very high Amish community, especially in northern Indiana, and I would assume that they probably are displaying or having different, some of their fantastic woodworking.
Was it clear, or
artwork.
did you take an exit poll after the ride?
It was clear. But, well, here's the thing. I mean, I don't know for a fact they were Amish,
Sure.
but I guess they could be Mennonite also, but maybe there's a Mennonite population in Indiana as well. It was either that or they were doing a casting for like Little House on the Prairie somewhere, and everybody had free time. I don't know, but based on the attire, it looked like it was Amish night. But then I thought, well, wait a minute. Now what's the time when they're allowed to get out of? Is it?
I have no idea.
Rumspa? Is that what it's called?
I'm not trying to leave you hanging, but I generally do not know.
I think that's right, where you leave the Amish culture for like 3 or 4 weeks to then determine whether or not it is what you want to commit to.
Okay.
But these were older folks, and that's, I believe, for teenagers.
By the way, something happened in media today that I want to get an answer from you on, Jake.
Okay, go ahead.
I feel that had the following happened and you've been a part of it, that charges would have been pressed by you.
Okay.
You ready?
Uh-huh.
This is from Ben Arthur. Ben covers a lot of things around the AFC South for Fox. He's at Titans camp.
Okay.
And this is the following that he tweeted out. Will Levis sprayed all the local media with some Parfum de mayonnaise, and I have to say, it's not bad. Had you had Parfum de mayonnaise sprayed on you by Will Levis, are charges being pressed? Because you disdain mayo, I think, more than any other substance
Do we
on
have
the planet.
Do we have that audio from the Fish concert, Eddie? Let me tell you what I'm assuming for Parfum de mayonnaise in terms of its scent. It would be the scent equivalent of this audio.
But here's the thing, Jake. We agreed that was only to be used now
It would be the scent equivalent of this audio. I'm just
for
telling you.
your bad analogy.
I'm telling you right now, it is applicable because the scent equivalent is this. If somebody sprayed that on you, what would you do?
The middle part is what I would do, which is there's a vomit aspect to that. I don't know if you heard it, but that Right. That's
He's saying that the mayonnaise perfume is real.
It's
had a
sold
bottle.
out again, by the way.
He had a bottle of it at the presser because I watched a clip of it, and he, I guess, sprayed some media members after the fact. So I was saying, if you unwarrantedly were doused by Will Levis, are charges being filed?
Yes.
I don't blame you. I'd be pretty upset as well. But Ben Arthur says, who we've had on the program before, it's not bad.
Anything involving me and mayonnaise is considered assault because it takes a ton of salt just to make the mayonnaise palatable. I'll say that. I'm telling you. Yes, that. Now I'm a cologne guy, so I'm down with that. I like colognes. Matter of fact, the other day I heard like a song, and I'm like, "What song is this?" And I Shazammed it, and the name of the song was something about cologne, and I'm like, "Well, no wonder I like it so much."
You would immediately have changed the dial had it been a song about mayo.
No question. I love my colognes. Eddie does not. It gives him a headache. How often has it been a while since you had a headache from my colognes, Eddie?
I haven't noticed them as much since I started complaining.
Yeah, I've
dialed it back.
decreased my spray count. That is correct.
If I do a 5 count, Eddie's really gonna have a headache today. So we'll go 2.5.
That's right. I try to be conscientious of this. So the other thing, though, that leads me to believe that this whole mayonnaise thing had to have been a publicity stunt, aside from the fact that no one would actually buy something that is mayonnaise scented.
Him having the bottle didn't do anything for you. Doesn't change anything.
That's the thing. But the fact it's $8.
It's because it's Will Levis, and he's number 8, and it's perfume.
No. I don't mean that. I'm saying the fact that it costs only $8 for a perfume. That's what led when they said.
Oh, it's admittedly right. You're right. If you're going to Macy's, you're not finding a cologne for $8.
Cologne is like at minimum. I mean, even like a not very. And there are some. Don't get me wrong. You don't have to pay a lot of money for a good cologne, but I'm just saying $8 is like. It's basically Axe body spray, right?
And Ben didn't say good. He said not bad, to be clear. So maybe he was being nice. But anyway, it's at least
now, I don't know if you know this or not. I don't know if you know this or not.
Well, maybe that was a publicity stunt, and the Titans asked him, like, hey, can you tweet this out?
Fair.
See, also, I don't know if you know this or not, but colognes vary from one person to the next in the scent once you put it on because you don't know one's body oil and how it mixes with that scent. And so one person's Gucci could be another person's Dolce & Gabbana. You just don't know because it just depends. Now, anything, though, nothing mixes with mayonnaise. I'll simply say that. Jimmy's plays of the day are next, and then we'll get you set up for John, who is going to be out at Grand Park in Westfield for Colts practice with the Colts and Cardinals getting set for their practice this evening. We'll let you know what's going on out in Westfield on the other side. It's Corey and Company here at 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan.
Today's plays of the day brought to you by Greenfield Signs and Lighting. Greenfield Signs, a professional, comprehensive sign company. 2 locations in central Indiana. They'll take your sign ideas and take hold of the project from design to delivery. Family-owned and managed business for more than 4 generations. You don't always get a second chance to make a first impression. Make the most of your first with Greenfield Signs and Lighting. Find more at greenfieldsigns.com. All baseball today will start out west and take the San Francisco Giants to win on the money line over the Atlanta Braves. We'll also take a bounce-back game for the Baltimore Orioles.
Hey, root for me.
A.K.A. Cute Fella, as they try to get redemption against the Nationals. First pitch there at 6:35. Last one for you. I'll take the Los Angeles Dodgers to win outright over the Milwaukee Brewers. Eddie, any baseball bets for you?
No, sir. Reds have won 3 straight, though, so if you wanted to bet against them, it would probably be wise.
Now's the time. The train's about to fall off the tracks again. Is that what you're saying?
What happens, Jimmy. So
right.
David Bell is their manager. They win some. They get close to 500, and then they just...
When will you allow yourself to believe? Because
Never.
we talked about, Jake, you mentioned this yesterday, about the Cardinals feeling like that team every year in like a bad year where there's a crowded field and no clear separation. The Reds are only, like a game or 2 back of them, if
They
that?
are 4.5 games out with a wild card. They are a game behind the Cardinals for second place in the NL Central.
So you won't allow yourself to believe, though?
Nope.
All right.
That manager, negative.
Jake,
By
as
the
the
way-
veteran, do you feel the same way? The veteran Reds fan? Will you not allow yourself to any belief or hope?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I vividly recall going up 2-0 against San Fran and being like, this is awesome.
Uh-huh.
You know, when I went to a Reds game once, back when the Indiana Ice, Jason Berkman, took a bunch of us from the media, courtesy of the Indy Ice, to years ago, to a Reds game. And it was like 102 degrees outside. And we went there and we went walking around just because we're baking in the sun. And I went into the gift shop and they had, like leather jackets kind of. I mean, they looked like
Sure.
It was a Reds leather jacket. I mean, it was really nice. And because it was like it was over 100, so there was like a fire sale on winter clothing, like a special they had. If it gets over 100 degrees and it's 70% off or whatever, I'm like, oh my gosh. So I bought this coat, okay? And I'm walking around. So now it's like the 4th inning. So I'm walking around the next 4 innings of the game, walking around carrying this coat under my gelatinously sweating armpits, right? But it's an awesome jacket. Very rarely do I really get the chance to wear it. 2 times that I vividly recall where I'm like, I'm wearing this along with my 76 Reds hat. I have a fitted hat that's the old Reds logo. And one time was after they went up 2-0 on San Francisco, and I'm like, this is it. They're going to the NLCS, and then the bottom falls out. The other time I wore it and went to Rusty Bucket for dinner to watch their game against the Phillies, and Roy Halladay hit them.
Gosh.
Yeah, and I'm wearing that jacket, and I'm like, I don't know which I'm more foolish, wearing it now or when I was carrying it around in 100-degree heat. You know what I mean?
So the jacket survived the purge. You still have it. It has been broken out on
I
rare
still
He
have
occasions.
didn't wear it
Okay.
during the Pittsburgh Pirates series either?
Cueto.
Yep.
Cueto. Eddie, do you have the breaking news sounder by chance? This just in via text message that I received. Hey, Jake, we have received orders from people that heard Jimmy's plays of the day from Greenfield Signs.
Let's go.
So there you go. Advertising with Curry and Company absolutely works, right? There you go.
Educate,
Love it.
entertain, and bring customers.
And we want to send your message out there. And if you have any interest in being part of this party, simply text me at 523-9288, and we will make it happen. 317-523-9288, and we will make it happen.
Shout
Again,
out to Phil and Shane over there at Greenfield Signs. They do a great job.
Great guys. And, talking about a family-owned business, been around forever.
Mm-hmm.
They've been involved in that industry forever. It's awesome. Again, 4 o'clock, I'm going to be out at the Dairy Bar. I will make you the world's largest milkshake. Probably until about 4:30 we'll be there, taking financial contributions for the Great American Milk Drive, and we are hoping to beat some of the TV kids that I saw in terms of the amount of money that they raised. The evening for the Colts and the Cardinals practice gets underway, Eddie, I believe at 6 p.m. Is that correct?
Correct. And then at 4 o'clock is when the festivities open for kids and whatever. I forget what the technical term of that area was called. It's spacing me right now.
I knew this. Colts City?
Yes.
Is that
thank
right?
you.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
right. Yep.
Colts City, right?
Go out there. There's a lot of reasons to be out there, not just for John's remote, but this is a great opportunity to get real substantial notes and observations for where this team is at, more so than preseason game number 2. Nate Atkins has mentioned it. Jake, you and I have talked about it. So too is Stephen Holder and Mike Chaplin when we've had them on. If push comes to shove, and we're going off of last year, the joint practices are where real observations are going to be made. I'm not expecting a ton of starting reps, if at all, for this team in the actual game itself. This is the proving ground these next two nights.
I think the practices are going to tell you more than the game, probably, right?
Yeah, I do.
Marvin Harrison Jr. Now, Marvin Harrison is expected to be there certainly this weekend. Edgerrin James, Eddie, give me that information again on when Edge is going to be out there.
He will be out there from 5 o'clock to 5:45 near Field 2 at Grand Park signing autographs.
And that is today?
Correct.
I mean, talk about a win-win. You go out, you get to see John.
Yep.
Then you can go over, see Edge. You can probably still hear John while Edge is signing autographs. You get to watch practice. You get to see Marvin Harrison Jr. You get to see Kyler Murray. The Cardinals have pretty do you think they go with like the maroon color in terms of like their shorts and helmets and all that, or like more like the bright red?
I think bright red now, like the last 5 or 7 years, I think they've gone to the bright red look.
Now, I still have a Phoenix Cardinals hat.
Really?
Is that a collector's item?
The Nerf football I referenced earlier is going for $280 on eBay, Jake. So I'd say just about anything could
When
be viewed as a
Anthony
collector's
Thompson
item.
got drafted by the Phoenix Cardinals, I bought a hat. And then when in Tecmo Bowl, when I was in college, my freshman year of college, we had a Tecmo Bowl season on my dorm floor. And I was the Phoenix Cardinals. I picked them specifically for Anthony Thompson, and I was like 2-14 on the year, but he led the league in rushing touchdowns because all I would ever do is get it down to like the 5-yard line, and then about half the time on 4 plays he could punch it in, and then the other times he would get thrown for a loss. Meanwhile, somebody else on our floor had Bo Jackson, and it was like a totally unfair.
Jake walked so we could run with our college football dynasties, Eddie. He walked with Tecmo Bowl so we could run with our advanced game metrics nowadays.
I think the biggest celebrity
Tecmo
in
Bowl's
attendance
awesome.
tonight at the practice for the Colts is me. I'll be there.
Are you going to be there?
Yeah.
Were you emphasizing biggest?
Mhm.
Okay.
We'd know that was grande. Eddie is not tall, but he is indeed grande. J&B is up next. He will bring you home in terms of the rest of the day. Again, Colts camp out in Arizona. Let you know what's going on, out in Grand Park against Arizona. He'll let you know what's going on with that, and we will be back with you at noon tomorrow. Kurt Signetti tomorrow. Is that right, Eddie?
1 o'clock.
And Matt Taylor, the voice of the Colts, on tomorrow's program. Thanks for listening to Query and Company.